And we are live. Cool. So let's give it just a second to warm up.
There we go.
Great. So thanks a lot for being here. This is, you may be watching this pre recorded, or you may actually be watching this live. My name's Greg Giordano, and you know that I do interviews and I do art on here and stuff on YouTube. But sometimes I'm really lucky to, because the internet's so great at connecting creative people together. And this in this situation, this is like the latest version of why this is really cool, because I got to quickly get to know a little bit artist named, is it Burleigh?
Burleigh, yeah.
Burleigh. Okay. Gerimi Burleigh. Um, actually, you know what? We have this great write up about him. So I'm just going to read this to introduce him. Oh, shut up, damn phone. Um, so Gerimi is currently probably most known to anybody who's on YouTube or on social network kind of art. You know, if you're catch a lot of art on the web, you would know him through Morningstar, which is his supernatural Western comic that he's been working on. But Gerimi is much, much more than that book. Writer, artist, graphic designer, toy industry, product packaging designer. He co-created the animated series Alien Racers for MGA Entertainment, and he co-wrote a 90-minute special for Cartoon Network. He's also self-published already one graphic novel called Eye of the Gods, and all of that, including this very interesting supernatural fable wrapped in the wrapper of a Western called Morningstar, which is the simple line of it is Lucifer's fall from heaven as told as a Western. All of that is available at jeremy.net. You can see it right down the show notes. You don't have to write it down. And you can see him on YouTube, where he's very cool about showing people how to do his work. He does live feed types of stuff. He also does tutorials. He's got a lot of interesting theories and insights on how to do the work. And he's also on Instagram and all kinds of other places. Very easy to find. All the links are down there. And buy his books, which is the other thing I will say before we even talk. You should be buying people's books. Don't just go and like it. Don't just share it. Those are great things. But before you do any of that, you should buy the books. He's also on Comixology, so it's very easy to check out the work and test drive it a little bit and make those decisions. But please, with indie creators, as soon as you can, buy the books, like it, and share it. Okay. Okay. So that's enough of me talking. Thank you so
Thank you
much
for
for
the
being
wonderful
here.
intro.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
And I'm going to switch my camera angle here to down to the board, because the whole point of this is to hang out together and draw. So I'm just going to shift, and I think Jeremy's going to shift too.
Yeah, let me turn the angle here. And I also realized I forgot to give you for the show notes.
Oh, okay.
I also have a preview page on my website. It's just
Great.
previews.jeremy.net. And on that, I've got 12-page previews of most of my comics. I've got previews of each issue of Morningstar. I have previews, like the preview PDFs you can download from, it's like the first 30 pages of my graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. So there's plenty of stuff there you can check out, try before you buy. Please just, read and see if you enjoy it,
So it's just simply adding previews onto the beginning of your existing URL.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Actually, that's something I started doing recently, because once you buy a domain, you have the ability to add subdomains. So I have previews.jeremy.net. I've got like amazon.jeremy.net, and all of them, they just point to different websites or things that I need. Like for my YouTube channel, I just have it as videos.jeremy.net, because, people don't necessarily need to go to YouTube per se, or they're looking for YouTube per se, but if they just want to see video content of what I do, that's the easiest place for them to find it. So yes, but thank you so much for inviting me on.
Yeah.
It's great for us to talk. I know that we talked on a long time ago, one of Peter Palmiotti's Synergy Studios. But
Yeah. Well, that's what I need to do that, right? I mean, I need to do a shout. Yeah. So Peter Palmiotti, Human Art Studio, Peter Palmiotti on any place, but certainly on YouTube, gets lots of artists together. And I totally thank him for bridging that gap. So thank you.
Yes, he is great at connecting people, bringing people together. He's like the United Way of comics.
Absolutely. So yeah, let's start at the beginning. You are born. No, I'm just kidding.
The beginning there was my mother.
Right. Well, there was all of our mothers, right? Yeah. So let's do a little bit of history. Because you've got a fairly diverse background, which, by the way, like for those people who are kind of younger artists or young either chronologically or young just because they're new to getting into doing art. Mm-hmm. Let's do the sort of like boilerplate. Nobody makes a living just doing, or very few people make a living just doing, the one thing that they really love to do, like let's say animation or comics or whatever. Mm-hmm. Most people, unless they have some very exceptional talent and frankly really rigid I don't want to professional like time skills and a bunch of other stuff.
Discipline. Let's say
discipline. You're not going to get like the DreamWorks job or something like that. Now, obviously, you do work in industries like toy, and you've worked in animation, so you did have that drive. But a lot of people, I just want to say, like, you should absolutely strive for whatever you want to strive for, but you got to be realistic that it's a hard deal to do. So most people have to, even if they're doing work that's cool, they have to do a bunch of different things in order to kind of get by, even in the course of sort of the wavelength of a career, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, I'm very interested in sort of the twists and turns and sort of how your career went,
Well, it's funny because I consider myself extremely fortunate because I've gotten to do the two things that I've wanted to do most in my life. Because as a child, what I wanted to be was a toy designer. That was the job I really wanted. And it was just the fact of like loving G.I. Joes and Transformers and just like, most kids, like I was one of those kids where if another friend of mine had a toy and it broke and they were going to throw it away, I'm like, no, don't throw it away. I'll take it. And then I would take it and unscrew and take it apart. And I would like take parts from other action figures or broken toys and rejigger them and make my own crazy Frankenstein creatures. Like I ended up making my own Thor action figure from like, I think it was like the body of like a G.I. Joe Dreadnought figure. And I took a head from, I don't know, it wasn't Duke, but it was some tall, blonde looking Nordic guy putting on the body of a G.I. Joe that was a particularly buff G.I. Joe, as buff as they can get.
Yep.
And just, I would do stuff like that. So I was always in love with toys. And then as I got older, moving into like junior high and high school, that's when I really discovered comics and fell in love with them. Mm-hmm. I was reading comics in like the late 80s, early 90s is when I got into comics. So I was like kind of watching during the rise of Image and sort of like, it was after Watchmen came out, but Watchmen, The Dark Knight, like I can remember when Sin City first started coming out from Dark Horse, and I didn't even jump on. So I think maybe the second trade was coming out, and I was like, oh wait, this is awesome. And it's like it was like a great time to be getting into comics. But in terms of the twists and turns, like you were asking about, when I went to college, I was a fine art major. Actually, I went to UCLA, and it is a great program for creativity. But it's really geared towards the fine art world. It's geared towards art galleries and about having conceptual ideas, being able to think about your work and speak about your work. But they don't really have an illustration program. So it's really an odd fit there.
The only applied arts program at UCLA would basically be the film and animation, right?
Yeah, exactly. And see, well, that's where I lucked out, because the animation program is a graduate program. You cannot get an undergraduate degree in animation from UCLA. However, they will let you take like the beginning level courses. Like there's 3 tiers of courses, maybe even four classes, but there's like courses that are open to all majors, even if you're not in the film school. So once I discovered that, I started using up all of my electives during like my junior and senior year, taking animation classes. And that was really where I started learning, oh, wow, I have not been moving my draftsmanship skills forward. I mean, they did have figure drawing classes and painting classes, but they were much more about expressing ideas. And they weren't about the techniques of illustration. They weren't
when were
teaching
you?
anatomy.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
Oh,
interrupt you.
go ahead.
Well, I just finished your thought. They weren't. What was that now?
They weren't teaching anatomy,
Right.
and they weren't necessarily teaching draftsmanship. I mean, they taught how to mix colors and things about actually working with materials. But the goal of the program was not to produce illustrators. There was nothing like an illustration program.
So what? Give us a timeline. What years were you going to college?
Let's see. This was 94 to 98.
Okay, so basically you're representing a generation that would be, because I'm 52, which doesn't give me any clout. It just means I remember things a little farther back, right? Because I graduated high school in 84, right? So like it's just, but you would be like second or third generation, not in terms of college. I mean, not 4-year cycles, but rather literal generations from the kind of the 70s sort of revolution in art training, which we all sort of are like kind of like the grandchildren of, where it was like removal farther and farther from fundamentals, and a lot of sort of radical ideas about, even in applied arts, although certainly applied arts kept its clutches on that stuff, but like there was a lot of changes that happened, certainly in fine art. So you're in a program, even though it's the 90s, it's still kind of like coming out from underneath that radical perspective, and it still hasn't gotten back to fundamentals yet.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, I haven't really talked to a lot of people from there, even though I've run into one of my drawing professors since then.
Yeah.
But I think that they're probably still more focused on like the blue chip art gallery scene. Yes. And in terms of the renaissance of the fundamentals that have happened more in the 2000s, I think that was already starting to happen, because when I was in college, I was an intern at Nickelodeon Animation.
Oh, okay.
And one of the nice things was that
great experience. Wow.
Huh?
Great experience.
Oh yeah, it was great. I worked on that show, Hey Arnold.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, really? That's my girlfriend. That's my partner's. That's her favorite animated show of all time. Hey Arnold.
Cool.
Did you work on the Halloween episode, the infamous Halloween episode?
You know what? I'm trying to remember, because even though I was grateful to be there, Hey Arnold was not. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed everyone I worked with, and I thought the show was cool. And it's one of those where I started watching it because I was working on it. It wasn't something I was particularly aware of beforehand.
So
I didn't even remember enough of the show to remember, because they produced the episode so far in advance that really UCLA has really short semesters. So in a semester, I really only got to work on like 2 or 3 episodes.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
It was a lot of like photocopying stuff and assisting,
totally
like doing grunt work for the storyboard artists and the character designers. But in between, when I wasn't doing that, they actually made time for me to sit down and work from their studies and work from their character designs, and they would show me things about character, because there's some interns who just want to be in the animation field, but I went in and told them, look, I'm an artist and I want to draw. And they're like, well, you're an intern, you're not in the union, you can't work on a show.
Yes.
But they would give me the stuff that they were working on and show me. Like, they would give me stuff that would be an assignment that they would give to a layout artist or a character designer. And it's like I would work on it on my own.
Because you're a go-getter.
Correct my work.
Right. Because you were a go-getter, and you were actually interested in like more than just simply doing whatever you had to do to get your your credits for your internship. You were like, no, give me stuff, give me stuff, give me stuff.
Yes, and to this day, it is one of the jobs. I'm like, if I ever had to work for, like, I was saying, as long as I could keep a roof over my head, I would gladly work for free and keep working there. It was like one of the greatest experiences, of my creative career, because it's just like, even in art jobs, there's still, there's always rough days and crappy days. But this was so much an environment where everyone so much really wanted to be there and was so enthusiastic every day. Yeah. That kind of creative environment
can't replace
invigorating. Yeah, exactly. And I learned so much there. The funny thing I was going to mention, we were talking about just the era. There were two things I was going to mention. Is one, it was before Invader Zim had ever even aired or was even announced, but they had told me that Yonan Vasquez was working on a show at Nickelodeon. He was developing something.
Right.
And he was across the hall in an area that like our team wasn't allowed to go in. Like it was a very private, like the place where they're developing new shows. Cause I think it was either Cat Dog had just been announced. I don't know if it had aired yet, but it was during that era.
Okay.
But the new project, the top secret projects were in a separate, it was in the same building, but it was in a separate like wing or across the hall from where the existing shows were. So
was that for security? Was that for security? Basically, just keep things secure on not letting the cat out of the bag about what was going on.
Well, I never really asked too much about why. The way the building was set up, it wasn't like, oh, it's a huge top secret bunker. It's just this side of the building is existing productions. This side of the building is new development. So I felt like it was more like that's how it would naturally break down. But because there was this separation between the two different teams, they didn't really let much out or let people kind of wander over and see what was going on in the other wing. And I was just dying to go over there all the time just because I was a fan of Johnny the Homicidal Maniac.
Of course.
Unless you're a deep comic nerd and you're into like really indie like slave labor comics, a lot of people wouldn't even know Yonan Vasquez at that era unless you were already into his stuff. But I was just like, what? He's over there? I never got a chance to go over and check it out. But the one thing I was going to mention was that they had figure drawing classes, and the instructor that I actually take figure drawing classes with now, currently, his name's Carl Ganas, and he's been teaching in the animation industry for years. He's also been a long history as a storyboard artist.
I just shared one of his videos the other day because I've been starting to share tutorials on my Facebook page as extra content, because there's people that I know that ask me questions about how to draw stuff, and I'm like, I don't have to tell you how to draw stuff. He can tell you how to draw stuff way better.
Exactly. Like whenever people are asking me those kind of questions, I usually will point them to his videos because I'm like, I feel qualified to show you what I'm struggling with and how I'm working to improve it. But in terms of actually teaching the material, when it comes to figure drawing, he's one of the go-tos. I'm like, this is who I study from. Take a look at his work. But he was teaching workshops at Nickelodeon back then, and that was actually the first time I had met him. And I don't think that he necessarily remembers it because I did mention it to him before, but it was a long time. He remembers the era when he was doing it, but he wouldn't remember me as a student because I was just an intern.
Of course.
And a lot of times I wasn't even there every week during the time that I was there. But
plus the guy's been doing this stuff like beyond the professional work, he's been doing classes since the 60s, right? So or 70s. Yeah. So literally thousands of people have gone in front of his face. It would be hard to imagine he would remember a lot of people.
Exactly. Much like the comic industry, you meet so many creative people on your journey, and it's the people that you encounter time and time again. Those are the ones you develop a relationship with and remember. But I feel bad, but I usually have to meet somebody 3 times before I really remember them.
Yeah. I never forget faces, but and I'm not meeting professional comics people or anything like that. My professional cuts off at more localized work, or it's not comic, but hey, do some but
you're breaking up a little bit. I don't know if it's the bandwidth, but you went into robot voice a little.
Uh-oh.
You're back. You're clear.
Okay now? Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I was going to say was lucky with is that I remember faces, but names I'm interminably bad with. So, it's really, and it's something I got to figure out. Either I got to take a course in, memory tricks like that, because that stuff is very important. So the fact that you have an ability, even on the 3rd time, you got the whole package, that's a really valuable skill for business stuff. And
it comes and it goes, but more often than not, I usually will just tell. I try not to pretend that I remember. I just try to tell people I know that I know you. I apologize for not remembering your name, but I can remember your face. I know that I know you. What show did we meet at, or and then a lot of times they don't necessarily remember where we met, but they just know me from somewhere too. Like I ran into somebody at a museum the other day, and I knew that they were a comic creator. And I actually just stopped and said, "Excuse me, are you a comic creator?" They're just like, "Well, I haven't done any stuff in a while, but," and I may have met him at some place that was art or toy business related as opposed to comics. But just the fact that I saw his face, I knew that I knew him, but I just didn't remember from where. And so stuff like that. But
right, yeah,
I digress. But the whole thing is that I'm trying to think of a way to frame the journey from going to college and working in animation.
right.
I didn't get any work in animation when I got out of school. Like I would occasionally get small gigs, but not working on any TV shows. It'd be more like somebody looking for a storyboard artist or a character designer. And it's just it's a hard gig to break into.
Right.
But the side note to frame this is that when I was in college, I was thinking about the comics industry and how much I loved comics, but I started thinking that in the mid to late 90s, if there were 100 monthly titles coming out from Marvel, which they were not putting out 100 titles a month, but if there were 100 titles from Marvel, 100 titles from DC, and then let's say you take Dark Horse, Image, and all the indie other places and put them together. So let's say that's like 300 titles coming out all together from all the indie publishers a month. That's 500 comics a month.
Oh yeah.
Now that sounds like a lot of books, and it is. But if you think about that job market, that means
it's a minuscule job. Tiny.
Yeah, there's 500 jobs for pencilers, 500 jobs for inkers, 500 jobs for colorists. That's not counting the artists that pencil and ink their own work. That's not counting the colorists that color multiple books. That's not counting the writers that are writing 3 or 4 or 5 titles. So at its max, even if you said 1 slot per person for a comic, that's a job market of 2,500.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know if this is going to work out for me as a career. I want to do it, but I just don't know if I'm going to make it. Like those odds are like, they're on par with getting into the NBA or the NFL. Like so it's just like, it just didn't seem like it was necessarily something I was going to make it into. So then I started looking at animation as more of a career field. And that was part of one of the things that led me to taking those animation courses. Now, the tough thing is once I got out of school, even animation, I found it difficult to find full-time work. I never did work on a full-time show until I got into the toy industry.
You were you were not on staff.
Yeah, exactly. I was never on staff on any animated show. And part of that is that I still have never really developed the discipline to be super tight. Like my characters don't even stay on model in my own comic.
Right.
I'm always like the hairstyles are shifting a little bit. They're changing. Like I almost feel like it's better for me to do my model sheets after I've done all of my thumbnails for an entire issue or an entire series. And because then the character, I see how I'm going to use them and the costume details that I would need to morph in order to make it more consistent. But a lot of the stuff kind of shifts as I go, as I create. But where I was going with that was that I started moving, since I couldn't find work full-time in animation, the one thing I could do was I was pretty good with computers in the sense of like knowing Photoshop, Illustrator, and the basics. So I started learning Flash, and I found jobs doing web design. Not necessarily that I had any experience as a web designer, but I was an animator, and I knew computers. And Flash at that point was, that point in the 90s where every site was like completely made in Flash.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we regretted it constantly. All kinds of Anyway, the answer, yes, of course.
Yes.
And
came back to bite the entire internet in the ass. But I was out of college in my early 20s looking for work in that era. And so,
you almost couldn't walk down the street in any metro city without finding like probably 12 jobs if you said you knew how to do Flash programming.
Exactly. And I wasn't even that great at it, but I was fortunate enough that one of my early jobs, I had there was a woman who taught action scripting before it moved over to like JavaScript. She taught it at Art Center. So she kind of showed me some basics and showed me some places here and there. She taught me enough tricks to keep my head above water, is what the truth is. But well,
sometimes that's all you need, to get by.
Well, yeah, that was definitely all I needed. And so from that, I ended up as a graphic designer. So I probably sustained myself through most of my 20s as a graphic designer, as opposed to really doing much art. And I had moved away from comics, so I started making short animated shorts. And I had one idea that I was for a comic book story that I shifted over to doing a series of flash animations that I did on. I posted them like on Newgrounds and on my
Oh,
website.
yeah. Okay.
So I was doing a little bit of like that and thinking, oh well, maybe I might be able to develop this and find someone who's interested in developing my work as a pre-Adult Swim and
Yep.
kind of after MTV's and Liquid Television. So I thought
Yeah,
maybe there
it
might be
was
some
there was an
opportunities.
interesting period of time then when we were all like very fascinated by what was then called web animation, as though, it's so funny because like now nobody would ever call something like that web animation. They just say it's animation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there was this kind of funny thing where like I don't know how to put it. It's almost like, well, this is like there was web animation as though it was somehow different or not. You know what I mean? Like it was just such a weird thing.
Yeah.
And all you had to do was be putting animation on the web, like art actually, or a lot of things. And suddenly it was like you planted a flag in a new world, and you were almost like you could almost stand out like more than you would maybe in traditional um, transmission mediums like print or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly a lot of people could see you, and their whole careers are built on just being the first ones to plant a flag and being decent, being good.
Yeah, that's where South Park came from. That whole like,
Exactly.
the spirit of Christmas animation. I can remember
Totally.
working at a design job when someone pulling me over to their computer to show me that on some crappy QuickTime streaming site and be like,
Absolutely.
that's pretty funny. Like it was weird and dark. And it's everything that you can see in South Park now, like years ago. So but
Yeah, and it was again like it was miraculous, but also like it was completely built out of the fact that they were planting that flag early on,
mm-hmm.
and had but also had some content that was compelling, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't just like garbage, it was funny. But those
Yeah,
were
it's gotta be good.
some amazing cowboy kind of days.
Yeah, I mean, it was very much a Wild West, and I think that's one of the things that I sustained a lot of creators on a spiritual sense, not on financially.
No,
It
no,
was sort
not
of like
no, yeah,
we
not
don't
fun.
know where this is going, but I feel like there's an opportunity to make stuff and do things with my art that I haven't done before. So that was
That
that was the
actually,
big impetus there in terms of getting into the animation and design world. But that ended up leading me to more and more web design and graphic design jobs. And that is actually how I ended up in the toy industry.
right.
Was after working at a few different design jobs, a few different like small companies, and doing little projects here and there and doing my own animations. I eventually moved into like packaging design, because in that era when the internet, like what we would call the original internet boom, well basically it was kind of like the dot-com crash. In that
Yes, that's
era
right. Yeah.
people needed to start finding other things to do, now that people aren't just going to give you, be paying you ridiculous sums just to do, would really be extremely limited, like less than Hanna-Barbera level animation.
Oh yeah.
And so I started moving into packaging design, and I got a job at MJ Entertainment, and that's the place where that was my first job in the toy industry. And in there, I started as a packaging designer, and really they tend to keep packaging design and product design very separate, because product design is very different. It's more of an industrial design field. They've got like
Different
there's a school
skills
out
and
here in LA called Otis,
mhm.
and they have a great toy design program where it's kind of like it kind of marries the industrial design aspects with the creative, fun, toyetic ideas. But they're two
Mhm.
very different disciplines. I mean, packaging design, you can kind of come from. That's how I got the job, because I had design skills. I had the basics. I was a warm body. I knew how to design. But if you're just
Mhm.
doing packaging design, those rules kind of apply to a lot of different things. So I was doing that for a number of years, and at one point I had pitched the owner of the company an idea for uh, a toy line, but my pitch was not product related. I sat down with a bunch of storyboards and just told him a story.
Yeah.
And then at the end of telling him that pitch, I said, and based on this, we can do all the crap that all toy companies do. We can do vehicles, we can do play sets, we can do all this other stuff. But, you know, this is the actual concept of the premise. So I didn't show him a bunch of product. I told him a story. We never developed the idea that I pitched. But when the company did have a concept that they wanted to go forward with, which was what eventually evolved into Alien Racers, the owner knew that my approach to toy design was story related.
Yep.
So he partnered me with the actual product designer who designed the products, and also eventually we ended up bringing in one of the copywriters from the team, because once it became a real thing that was going to be an animated series, we needed more writers kind of flesh out the story Bible. And our story Bible was very limited because there's a long-standing animation writer, Bob Forward, and he was our story editor, and he was great to work with. And I always feel bad that I didn't just milk his brain for every piece of writing knowledge that it's worth. The only reason why I didn't at the time is because I was actually really afraid of diving headlong into animation, because in any field, you can't just walk in and expect that's going to be easy to become good at it, or that opportunities are going to open up to you. And animation writing is no different. People are, fighting tooth and nail to get gigs working on animation. And knowing how much work it is, even though I had an in working at the toy company that was developing this, I felt like turning my focus from writing. At that point, I'd already started working on what eventually became my first comic book, Eye of the Gods. It's a psychological thriller. And I knew that writing and drawing comics was something I was going to get back into. I was afraid that diving into animation would take me away from making my own comics. And if I had to, much like me getting out of, the reason why I got out of web design and flash animation is because at a certain point, I was doing so much programming, and I'm not that great. I'm not good at it. I'm not a programmer at all. I'm certainly no coder. And at a certain point, when I was sitting down with books of JavaScript and studying them, I started realizing, do I want to be a programmer or do I want to be an artist? Because I'm not enjoying what I'm doing.
Well, plus, if you're gonna do I have lots of friends who do that stuff, and I admire them because it's tenacity plus sleeplessness plus kind of almost you gotta almost as a person, you gotta not exist for a little while, because you're doing all this number crunching and all this other stuff. It's if you're going to do that, then you're going to have to dive into a pool that there's no bottom on, and that's you. That's who you are, and that's what you're made out of for, 5-10 years of your life, or however long you stick with it. It's going to be that's who you are. You're not going to have any time or energy to do anything else. And,
yes, exactly. So, it's got a lot in common with comics.
Oh, sure. It's an extremely dedicated. I actually would call it. I don't know if it's an art form. I think there's questionably, for sure, there's artistic programming for sure, especially in sort of more experimental media design and info media kind of crossovers. But certainly, it's a trade. It's certainly on par with learning any kind of trade that has creativity in it, for sure.
Oh yeah. I would definitely say that the art comes in the sense that language is a complicated thing, and that's why they call them programming languages.
Yes,
because it's linguistics, but it's finding elegant solutions to complicated problems. And to me, that no matter whether you're building a car, coding an app, building a toy, there's that's the, I would say, the real artistic aspect is finding the simplicity in a very complex thing, the elegant simplicity. That's what I admire, and I admire it in comics too. But yeah, so that's actually the thing that led me out
to the
of
toys.
that's what led me out of the design the web design thing and into the toy world. You know, again, also with the .com crash that I mentioned, but so I was partnered with another writer and another and a toy designer. You know, and when you're working internally, when you create stuff, you're creating the company property. It's like creating something for Disney. It's not like, oh, I'm the creator and I get residuals or anything like that.
Yes.
It's owned by the toy company.
Just
So,
like industry comics or
yeah,
TV,
exactly.
work in TV or whatever. Yeah, it's all
Exactly.
the same.
It's work for hire.
Yeah.
So the work that we did in terms of creating the initial development of the characters, we then hired, you know, veteran animation writer Bob Forward. He came in and I got to work closely with him. But that's the reason why I was kind of the whole tangent. The reason why I got on that tangent was that it was a great opportunity for me, and I probably like now I would very much want to just stick a straw in his brain and just suck everything about writing and storytelling out of his head.
Right.
At the time, I was like, I'm struggling to make my comics as it is, and I still have design duties that I have to do on top of the work I did have to do for the animation show. So I didn't dive as deeply into animation writing as I probably should have, given such a great opportunity.
Well, it's the folly of youth too, a little bit, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
what are you going to do? I mean, it's,
yeah. Well,
you can't have the wisdom that you have. You can't have the wisdom you have now then, because it was then. I mean,
exactly.
Right?
I wasn't wise. I was just a wise ass.
That's pretty much how it goes for, I think, all young artists who, especially when you first start to really work and start to make a living, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
you're in this like really interesting kind of like, because I used to work in a kitchen too. Like I used to be a chef. It's like you're in this really interesting kitchen full of, sous chef, garde mangers, back of the house, front of the house. So you're in this great, interesting team of creativity that all has different parts, but you're all working towards the goal. So that must be pretty exciting, right?
Oh yeah, it was like, I would put that up there. That was sort of the number 2 after Nickelodeon, because just the fact that I would get up, go into the office, I'd be working on packaging stuff. Then I'd spend time working with the animation team. Sometimes we'd go over to the animation studio for meetings, and then at the end of the day, I'd come home, have a quick workout, and then sit down and work on what was eventually going to be my first graphic novel. And to bring it back into comics, I had moved away from it because I just didn't think that there was a full-on, it was purely the practicality of, is there a career for me in this? Can I make a living doing it?
Yeah.
And what I realized was that the desire to tell sequential stories would not leave me. It plagued me. In the best possible way. Like, I'd made a YouTube video called "The Time I Quit Comics," basically talking about the experience of going through of walking away from comics. Because some people ask, well, how long should I do this before I give up? And I tried to give up. And I couldn't. I just wanted to keep making comics. So that's when I came back. Go ahead.
It's also, well, I was going to say, it's also kind of, I mean, that's an understandable question to ask from a perspective of not being familiar with how this all works. And so that's a great question, but it's also, so I'm just prefacing this by saying, but it's also kind of the wrong question, in that what you need to ask yourself is, and these are vocational questions that everybody has to ask as they're growing up, right? And that's, what is the balancing act between the things that I'm really good at, the things that I'm really desirous of doing as a creative person, and where I have to pay the bills, and where can I make all those things come together, and then where am I going to have to like sort of go, oh well, this is going to be weekend warrior stuff until this or that, or it might always be independently created weekend warrior stuff, and that's okay, right? Because the whole thing is predicated on capitalism, which everybody has to deal with, but there are ways to navigate through it, right? So it's almost like, it's not like you give up or you don't give up. It's either you do it and maybe you don't make money at it, but you love doing it and you make time for it, or you don't, or you have that special sauce where you actually manage to like persevere and something financial comes of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of where I landed, was that I loved this thing. I wanted to do it. I was fortunate enough to have a creative job that could pay the bills,
Right.
so that I could put all of my spare time into the creative thing that is 100% mine. No one's telling me what to do or what to change, and I could just indulge my personal creative drives. And so that just became what I poured all of my non-work energy into, was just starting to write and draw comics again. And it probably took me 5 years to finish my first graphic novel, because after I finished what was essentially the first 30 pages or so, I realized there was a lot of story elements I hadn't, like, I was thinking of it in terms of issues. Like, I had my outline, I'd write one issue and then move on to then draw it, and then move on to the next issue, write that, draw it. But I realized that I really needed a much tighter outline. I really needed a better understanding of all the twists and turns of the story. There were whole characters I ended up writing out of the book. So what I did was I thumbnailed the entire graphic novel, and then went back and lettered my thumbnail so I could read it as a book. Then I
Mm-hmm.
edited that. I showed that around to friends, got feedback on that early thumbnail form, and then went back to the beginning, scrapped all the pages I did, and started over.
Oh,
So
wow.
that, yeah. Um,
You
and I,
you you essentially did what one does in animation, which is that you storyboarded and kind of showed off the boards
mhm.
to be, of the entire project,
Oh yeah,
but
like an animatic.
right, but instead of it being for a 3 minute, episode of a cartoon, you did it for a whole graphic novel.
Yeah. Um,
It's a
and
lot of commitment.
well, it's just a matter of, I realized it was more that I realized what wasn't working, in the sense that I realized, in a process level, I knew there were things I hadn't figured out, and I had to go back and figure out those things before I could finish the book. And it seemed the most logical way to me was to make a rough version that I could read. And I'm still balancing back and forth, because obviously there are creators who can write a story without knowing how it's going to end, and they can write books issue by issue, and just, they kind of know that there's a target they're shooting for at the end of this arc, but they don't necessarily know how they're going to get there. And I tried that actually with Morningstar, where my outline was tighter than it was with the first book I published, but it still was not. It was more like a paragraph or two per issue for an 8 issue series. And then when I got about halfway through, I realized that I was happy with the ending I had, but I hadn't really earned it in terms of emotionally what the characters go through. And so I sat down and I rewrote the second half of the series, putting a lot more emotional content in terms of, like, explaining more of the characters' motivations. I moved a big reveal to much earlier in the story, because otherwise one of the characters' motivations didn't make sense. Um, so it was one of those things where I'm still trying to work that out. And I've found that I am much more of, like, you've heard the expression of someone writing by the seat of their pants,
Yeah.
plotters versus pantsers.
Yeah, yeah,
I am
yeah.
not, yeah, I am not anti-pantser. I've tried it twice and it bit me in the ass. So I've said, you know what? Maybe I'm a plotter. Doesn't mean I'm never going to try writing by the seat of my pants again. I may try it again. But for now, this seems to be my particular creative process.
Although I would say that, like, the people that it's very rare thing, and I think it's a product more of maybe some of the genius level of the writers who can do seat of the pants writing.
Mm.
Like, in reality, I think the hard reality is that one must build you have to build a house, a foundation up, and every episode of a TV show or whatever has to be built that way. And I think it's sort of like, I think that it's a professional and good instinct that you have, that you need the structure. I think it's sort of, it only will allow you to succeed more. Um, it's well and good to for a lot of folks to be like to say that they can do that. I question whether or not they are exceptional at juggling a lot of those pieces of the story, and I think that it's probably a good idea to have that stuff, set up and boxed up as you go along.
Well, what about you? What's your writing process like?
Well, fortunately, my writing process is that I have a writer that I'm a creative partner with, creative partner that I'm working with. That's pretty cool guy, and I have a real Lennon and McCartney relationship with, and working on Holiday has been a real joy because we both think a lot alike, and but dig deep down core stuff. I mean, he's a writer and he knows how to do that, and I mean I do too, but like for me it's the same stuff, but it's harder for me to get from A to Z with it. So early on, it was great to be able to work, to fiddle with this whole project with him. Um, but no, the things that I've written, that I've drawn and stuff, or like worked on in collaboration with some other people on, I tend to find that I always tend to work better in collaboration with other people. It's not that I don't have ideas. It's not that I don't have solid, dialogue, but there's some synergy that always ends up happening if I'm working with somebody else, and they make something, and I'm like, you know what? If we wrote, what about this dialogue? Or well, can I? Because like the best example is with Holiday, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like he's written this. He wrote a script for the first issue and I added scenes to it. There were things that ended up actually changing, not the plot, but definitely elements that got added in. Characters. There's a number of things that happen. Um, did we just lose signal? Are
I'm
we
still
still
here. I
alive?
can hear you, and the live icon is still lit
Yeah.
in the
Okay.
corner that I see.
Because it looks like something got. It looks like my video is crashing or something like that. I think I'm going to switch sources in just a second. Um, what was I going to say? Yeah. So like that sort of stuff happens. Like where I'm just starting the second issue, and there's a scene right that starts off the book, and I'm just like, you know what? I think the scene that comes after really should be the one in the beginning, and I actually expanded it. But it's not like he goes, "Oh crap, you just ruined the whole thing." And like he's like, "Oh no, that's great. Keep doing it." Right? Like so, I have
Mm-hmm.
a very indulgent relationship with him. So the way I know how to write best is in collaboration with somebody else, and it seems like that's why I would love like one of the dream jobs of my life would be if I ever got the chance to be in a writer's room on a television show or something, because
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea of a bunch of people sitting together and banging out something, and it being the product of everybody in the room, like getting really creatively high off of each other's ideas, and everybody adding their little bits in that no one else, that the other person wouldn't have thought of. Like I think that's like just a tremendously creative process. So but that's not for everybody.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Right. But at any rate, that's my where I come from. But I mean, I have tons of stuff I've written. I have many Google Docs.
Mm-hmm.
I have many Google Docs. But I don't know if any of them will happen. There's something I'm thinking about doing that's autobiographical, actually, and that would be a graphic novel. And but I got a couple of other things that I want to finish first before I take that on, because I think that's going to be a couple of years to make that work.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
hardest part is finding the time because the ideas don't stop coming, and you want them to come, but at a certain point you're like, when am I gonna? You look
yeah,
at your brain like, when am I gonna
yeah,
get time to do this?
yeah. I mean, I have a master list. I have individual like idea things that I just throw into Google Docs, and then I add the little name of it onto this master list. And there's like hundreds of things in there now, so it's not going to ever happen. Like my stepkids will break into my Google account when I'm dead one day, and they'll be like, "Wow, there's a lot of stuff here." Like, yeah, they get to see, but that's all right.
Well, you know what though? I mean, the more you work, the more hopefully you'll have time to put opportunities to put more time and energy into your individual projects. You still
Oh
there?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I am. I am still. Am I not? Am I not here?
No, I can hear you. It's just I thought
There we
maybe you
go.
said you were switching sources because the screen, you were still there audio wise, but the screen went white, and I was just like, did I lose him? So
I think I'm back. I mean, I
yeah.
think it was a smooth transition. Yeah. So like the thing is, well, also, I mean, total transparency because it otherwise I'm not being authentic. I think, and that's one of the things I like to do in my conversation is like I'm disabled, right? So like I
Mm-hmm.
have a different work, like my day is different than other people's days.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have both I have fibro, I have different things, so it's like
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of pain stuff and there's this debilitating fatigue stuff, and then it's like bad days, good days, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I'm actually planning to do with like YouTube and stuff like that, and even doing 100-day challenge soon, is I want to do it from the perspective of, yeah, like I can show you stuff about drawing and this is what I do and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody can, like, there's tons of great people out there. But I do have the unique perspective of is like, how do you juggle that against the fact that, you can't work every day? And
Yeah.
and you are, you're a disabled person. You do not work in the classic sense, but it is still your work. It's still your vocation, and it still has importance in your life, right? And also could be published. Like we published the first issue of the book, so and people bought it.
Mm-hmm.
I've sold we've sold several boxes of those first issues. So there are people who are looking for another one, and we have other ideas that we want to do. And independent comics and the internet allow that to happen, as you well know. So that's so. I wanted to say that because like I think the full disclosure of that makes it a little easier to understand where I'm coming from. Um, and but anyway, back to you because you're the star here. Um,
I don't know. I wouldn't say star, but I feel like
no,
I'm the
totally, dude.
humble guest.
No,
I'm
no, no,
welcome
no.
into your home.
You don't gotta. You don't have to be humble, man. There's no need. I wouldn't be humble if I was doing that kind of quality work. So I'll tell you that much.
Well, that is kind of you to say. I mean,
It's good
I
stuff.
feel, you know what? It's one of those things where I'm appreciative whenever someone says nice things about my work.
Yeah.
I constantly, I know what is in my head, and I know what I'm capable of drawing. And for me, the big challenge is that I think maybe 2 or 3 times in my life have I drawn what's actually in my head. So I'm always chasing that dragon creatively.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. But
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
all of us are. I think most of us are dealing with that.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's the part of you that has to be like cool with what you're doing because, especially like if you're getting paid for it, right? If you're getting paid
Mm-hmm.
for it and it's not just like, online commissions, and you're actually working for a business that uses art in its business, animation, toy design, etc., you're really doing a certain level of work. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
clear, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and even my end of pro, which is like, either local or it's out there. I had one client in France, who wanted commissions of a personal nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I did some comics work last year for a really great nonprofit project, non-fiction comics of stories of migrant workers. That was really, really interesting to do. But whatever you do, I mean, you're pro, you're doing stuff, but we all have that in us where we're saying, is this really good enough? And also, we also have this huge lexicon of the greats, the giants that we're standing on the shoulders
Mm-hmm.
of, and we know how far it could go, right?
Oh
all
yeah.
you got to do is be aware of like Wallywood, Jack Kirby, Howard Chaykin, Alex Toth, Ramona Fraden, a few others, and you've got all the prerequisites to say, oh, I'm not doing it good enough, man. I'm just not doing it. Like, right
there, you're like, I'm never gonna beat that list.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So,
holy shit.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is something that has been hugely helpful. Whoops, hang on. The paper's curling up from the heat and from my hands here. Something that's been hugely helpful in terms of dealing with that, for lack of a better term, that imposter syndrome.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not about making me feel better about my place in the art world. It's more about me not worrying about it. Well, okay, I'm not framing this well. Figure drawing class has been great for keeping me engaged
Mm-hmm.
and humble without beating myself up. Like that's one of my
Yeah.
other videos I made was like how to improve without beating yourself up.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
the idea is that when I've been taking figure drawing classes regularly for over a decade now. Like every
Mm-hmm.
week, I go get in front of the model, and sometimes it's classes that are on specific topics like drawing heads, drawing hands, drawing feet. sometimes it's a,
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
it's on costume and drapery. I've taken classes on environmental drawing, but when I first started doing figure drawing class, when I first started taking them, my drawing for most people when they start something new, your work comes out pretty crappy because you're
Yeah,
new
of
at it, you're
course.
not good.
Yeah. Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
in my mind, I had always avoided figure drawing class when I was younger because I liked what came out of my imagination better. I liked my imaginative drawings, and whenever I tried to draw what I was looking at, it didn't come out well. I'm not a realistic artist. I'm not an observational artist. But what I realized is that I'm always going to be bad at it if I never practice. So at first I bit down and practiced simply because I said I want to be a better comic book artist. So if I need to improve my chops, figure drawing is a good way to do it. So when I started, I was just going purely with the goal of this is make better comics. But over the years, yes, I did start to improve, but also I started to enjoy the learning process. It wasn't just, oh, I can see I'm getting better, so I feel better about it. It wasn't just the positive reinforcement of that. I actually enjoyed the process of sitting down, getting in front of a model, starting to draw, and realizing, oh, wait, I really don't understand how the bones of the knees fit together. Or, wow, I really don't understand what happens between the rib cage and the pelvis when someone does one of those cool torso twists. Like, I don't understand what's going on in there. And then having to sit there and work it out, like looking at the model, having to pull out an anatomy book, pulling the instructor over and asking him stuff. And it stopped being, at a certain point, about the work being good. And it came about me enjoying the learning process. Like,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I think that attracts visual artists in general and comic creators in specific is that we're never going to be bored. There's no point where we're going to know everything. I mean, just on the drawing aspect, forget about composition, forget about storytelling, and that's a whole nother like 4-dimensional chess game right there. But just the act of drawing buildings and people and keeping them within scale with each other and learning how to properly depict props and making it a believable, not real photorealistic, but making it a world that all feels like of a piece, like it all belongs together. There's no point at which we're gonna say, like, there's a point where you may feel pretty good about your work, and that's the goal. You want to feel pretty good about your work, but there's no point where you're gonna say, I know everything, because that's
Right.
never gonna happen.
Right.
And I started to fall in love with the fact that I'm never going to have all the answers. I'm just enjoying studying this problem. And then when I'm done with it, studying another problem. Um, like just even last week, I went to figure drawing class and I figured out something about drawing on toned paper that I had struggled with for literally years. Probably like 5 years I've been trying to figure this out and not doing it right. And usually whenever I draw on toned paper, it looked crappy. But I kind of made a breakthrough in class. And when I came home, I was super excited. And I told my wife, and I just wouldn't shut up about it. And I was like, the class usually it ends at 10 p.m. So by the time I get home, it's already like 10:30, getting close to 11. And after having a bite to eat, normally I try to like read or do something to settle down and then go to bed. But I'm like, let me just draw for a little bit, just work over these ideas that I
Yeah.
believe I understand. Because sometimes you think something clicked, and then you look at it the next day and you're like, oh no, it's the same old crap. Or I just look at it a different way. And I sat down and drew for a little while longer, and then I look up and I'm like, oh, it's 12:30 and I got to work tomorrow and I really got to get to bed. And so I go to bed and I can't stop thinking about it. and I'm tossing and I'm turning. I'm just thinking more about this. And I'm thinking about talking with my other coworkers who are also artists and thinking about talking to them and sharing what I figured out. Like,
Yes.
I'm just so excited. And then after laying in bed for about 45 minutes, I got up and I can't remember if I drew for a little while longer or whether I got up and read for a while. Because if I got up at like 1 a.m. and started drawing, I'm screwed. I'm not going to be able to fall asleep until 4. So I got up and just read for a little bit just to let my mind kind of calm down and relax. But the fact that I get that much excitement, like I feel like I get as much excitement from making a breakthrough in figure drawing as I do from getting a printed copy of a comic I just finished, like brand new. Like, they're different forms of excitement, but I get just as excited and just as jazzed about studying art with a capital A as I do about all of the aspects of making comics. And that really helped carry me forward in terms of like this whole started with me saying, well, I don't really want to put myself on any a pedestal isn't the proper word, but I don't want to pat myself on the back for the work that I make. But it's not about it's not about me beating up on myself and saying, oh, my work sucks. It's just I love the journey and I love
Yeah.
the struggle, because there's definitely days where it's not coming, and no matter what I do, I'm busting my ass, and it's just like, nah, this I may not be crap, but this drawing is crap.
Exactly.
Um, but
And don't you find that that's a critical difference that you have to, or not difference, that's what's critically different about how you have to learn to assess your work. If you, first of all, if you want to get better,
mhm,
which a lot of folks are kind of visually tone deaf,
mhm,
and that's why they don't progress, I think, in their work. But it's also critically important because if you don't develop the notion that, like, no, I do good work, I'm doing, I do, I am doing good work in general, but
mhm.
I have room to learn this, and I have room to learn this, and this is a good thing, and this is an exciting thing. If you don't turn that around to that kind of thought process, you won't get anything done, and you kind of won't get any farther because it'll be too much weight on your shoulders, and it sort of ruins the process. It kind of spoils the process of trying to learn and trying to, because you got to enjoy what you're doing in the end. I mean,
Oh
right? I mean,
yeah,
you got
yeah.
to just there's no way around it. So I was wondering if, like, do you think that, because obviously you encounter a lot of young artists or people that are just sort of getting into this stuff, and don't you find that that's a potential poisoner of the well, is the kind of like
Oh,
the
the negative
the
reinforcement,
the,
or the
the
constant
negative
beating up on yourself.
the negative, and also yeah, exactly, the negative part of it, and how it just kind of like it's like you got to have a balance. There's got to be a balance
Hmm.
there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely, that's one of the big things that I tell when I talk to younger artists. I try to tell them to enjoy the process and enjoy the learning. And it's funny. I have a friend of mine who we were grabbing coffee a while back, and we were talking about my creative process and the fact that I have this whole thing where, like, I start using reference in a big way over the past year, because I've really seen how it helps me keep my work in proportion.
Hmm.
Because I wasn't using it. I was only using reference in terms of looking at a picture. Like, if I have to draw a gun, I would look at a picture of a gun, so I would know this is the shape that the gun should be, and these are the physical components it has. But I wasn't using reference at the level, say, that like Norman Rockwell. That's kind of where I really learned from reading
Oh, sure.
his biography, because I didn't understand as a younger artist that you do draw from your imagination first, and you get the ideas down, and then you find the reference to support the thing that you want to draw. You're not just saying, oh, well, I want to draw a car. So you find a picture of a car and you trace it. It's like you say, well, what's the car doing? What street is it on? Is it skidding? Are the wheels turning? And you do the roughs of, like, what's your idea? What's the story you're telling? And then you go and you find the things to make that look correct, and say, well, this is really what the car would look like at this angle. And you know what? I drew something that looks like it's this model car, but that's not really what that model car looks like, or it doesn't have this kind of fender, or and it's not necessarily going into the minutia. It's just enough for whatever type of story you're telling. Because if you're doing something that's a little bit more on the cartoony illustrative spectrum, you don't need to be as exact. It's really more about how does it feel. Versus if you're doing something that's more of a photorealistic comic style or illustration style, then yeah, you're gonna need more detail in it. But the thing about enjoying the process and not beating up on yourself, I was talking a lot about how I've been working much slower because I've been using more reference. And reference, I think, does speed you up, but I just think I need to be using it for a while until I get better at it. Like that whole thing of first you get good, then you get fast, then you get good and fast.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it is making, I'm going slower, but I'm going slower and making work that to me is visually better. And the argument my friend made was, dude, you're taking like a year to put out an issue. Just, he said, your stuff looks good enough as it is. You don't need to do all of that work. And I understand that he was saying it from a supportive standpoint. It's kind of, it's the middle ground between what we're talking about. Because in my mind, the pushback was that I'm trying to make better work. I'm not taking my time because I think it's not like, I don't think that it's not like I hate the work. It's more that I look at this and now I'm learning and I'm developing the skills to, like the way that I said that I can never draw what's in my actual head, I'm getting closer to that. And I found that these extra steps and this extra process where I've got reference, or the fact, like flipping your pages. Some artists swear by it. Some artists don't do it at all. Where do you stand on?
I know what you're talking about with that, but do you mind explaining just in case somebody watches this and doesn't know what you're referring to?
Well, yes. In fact, let me grab something that will illustrate it even clearer, because I've got a little pad next to me. So a trick that the old masters used to use is that when they looked at their paintings, they would look at it while they were working. They would look at it in a mirror, because our brain naturally filters out mistakes that we see. Things that seem correct to us. If you look at the mirror image, then it'll trick your brain into seeing the mistake that it's trying to hide and cover up. It's like typos. You have a hard time seeing typos in your own writing.
Yeah, which is why we need editors, even though
exactly that's exactly why we need editors.
Yeah.
and the same thing, flipping your drawing is kind of like a visual editor in the sense, like this sketch right here. This is a rough for a page that I'm working on in my comic in Morningstar. And a lot of artists, when they do flip their drawings, they're either working digital and they just flip the canvas, they look at the mirror image, or they'll put their artwork on a light box and they will flip over the drawing and look at the reflected image. And when you look at the reflected image, like when I did that with mine, I found places where the joints didn't line up, places where the volumes weren't as convincing as I thought they were, places where the anatomy and the hand was wrong. And so I do corrective drawings on the other side to fix it. And then this is what I end up scanning in, and then I flip it back so it's back to the proper orientation. Then I blow that up and I print that to a Bristol board. I tend to do my drawings, my layouts on vellum, only because I found after a few years of using a light box, it started hurting my eyes staring into the light. And I know
Are you referring to like ad comp paper or tracing vellum, or do you mean vellum Bristol board?
This is the tracing paper.
Yeah, so right. Okay.
Yeah, because tracing paper vellum, it's thicker than normal tracing paper. Like it's like a thin copy paper, but it's far more durable than tracing paper, where you erase too hard, you're going to tear that. So
the reason I ask is because I use that stuff too, and also like the version that's like architectural tracing vellum too, or what like. But it's just I know that some folks don't get. It's very confusing when you say. Not when you say, but when one says vellum paper, that can mean a number of different things. And I know that for beginners.
Because a variety of things can have a vellum finish.
Vellum finish, right.
Vellum finish.
Right.
Illustration board can have a vellum finish.
Right. But if you come from a background like either of us come from, for me, it was more like newspapers and comps and, add like design comps and stuff like that. But we
Mhm.
all used to say like, okay, we'll do it on vellum and then take the best stuff and redraw it
Mhm.
and then like paste them up on boards for presentation or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And it's interesting. Like I realized this recently because somebody was like, "Wait a minute, what are you talking about? I thought you meant Bristol board." No, I meant this other thing. This is
No,
other.
yeah.
It's like
You're right.
it's like
It's important to clarify because I mean everyone's interested in like what materials people are using and then how it goes. Which, by the
yeah.
way, I really dig the piece that you're drawing right now. That looks great.
Oh, this right here.
Mm-hmm.
Even you dig the fact that I'm drawing your character.
Yes. Yeah, I realized I'm all
Okay,
you're
good.
doing Lucifer.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna see how far I can get on a Lucifer holiday like combo
Little jam piece there.
Yeah, like a heroic gunfighters
Mm-hmm.
together kind of thing. Let's see what I can do here. Because I was thinking, what am I gonna draw here? Like, I'm not working on my book in this during when I'm doing this because I'll just mess all kinds of crap up. But I was like, oh, that'd be good. That'd be a good thing to
I do
try.
find that like when I'm live streaming, that sometimes it's harder just to pay attention. Like I can
Yeah.
draw while I talk, but I realized that I put at first I drew the panel I'm doing now in panel 3 instead of panel 5. I'm like, oh wait, no wonder that's okay. And just when I got to this, I'm like, oh
Mm-hmm.
wait, I did the wrong thing there. And sometimes that's one of the tough things about doing live streaming is
Yeah.
you get a little
Because we get caught up
you
in the
get caught up in the
conversation. Yeah.
conversation
Yeah.
and
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I figured, all right, I'm going to do something where it's like it's a little easier to to fix it up if I have to and all that. But yeah, no, man, it's oh, so here well, okay, so do you feel like you've said what you want to say about perfectionism
oh yeah.
and learning? Because the one thing that I take from what you're saying, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is that number one, it really jazzes you up to continue to learn. Number two, you
Mm-hmm.
know that there's always room to get better, but also, right, caveat, it is as long as you know, or at least you're pretty sure because you're either getting outside assurances from professionally or whatever, you have to also be okay with the work that you're doing in the moment and be really good with it, like, and be psyched with it and like happy with, like, oh, this is great, like I'm enjoying doing this, like I'm doing cool shit right now, like,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to kind of balance all that out, right? And also I think the one thing I keep getting from you with so far is, you know you have to keep learning, you have to take classes, even if it means just doing YouTube stuff or whatever,
Oh yeah.
but you need to keep both like your chops, right? The things you already know how to do, but also to explore more. And you can't just, say, all right, well, I did it. I hit I'm in Shangri-La Valley and I know all there is to know. And I'm a Jedi now. And so I'm just going to walk the earth and have adventures. It's like, no, there's lots of Jedi tricks. You got to keep learning and all that stuff, right? It's just
Yeah.
part of the deal.
Well, it's like trying to draw a perfect freehand circle. That's like the ultimate Zen problem for an artist because you're never going to be able to do that. There's just
Yeah.
and that in a way that's how I look at studying all of these elements. It's never going to be perfect, but what happens is in the pursuit of making the thing better, not perfect, but in the pursuit of making it better, it gives you growth in ways that you might not have. Like if you just say, all right, this is how I draw, this is my style, and people like it, and that's what I'm going to do, I feel like there's a big potential to stagnate
Oh
creatively.
yeah. Yeah.
And so the goal in chasing it is it's never negative, and it's never beating someone up. It's never beating yourself up and saying that anything sucks. It's simply about embracing continual growth. Yeah, I really do love learning and studying. And for me, the real challenge is like when I had the conversation I had mentioned with my friend about like the stuff's good enough, just move forward. He has a valid point because what I ask myself when I finish each page is what can I live with? Meaning it's not perfect, but it tells the story versus what can I not live with? Meaning I look at this and I know it's not right. I really need to fix it. And the new territory I have is, what is the stuff that I could live with, but I can see how it can be better, and is it worth me taking the time to push just to level up my craft a little bit. And that's actually the area where there is some validity in me spending a little bit too much time on things, because if I'm telling the story and it works visually and people get it and it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb, that generally my first instinct is, well, let it go and move on. But as I work on
Because
these things,
there's like issue 2, issue 6, issue whatever
mm-hmm,
ahead of you, right? Like it's
exactly.
like because I'll tell you what, like the reason why this is a very, very interesting subject to talk with you about, and I would just soon talk about it for the entire time we're hanging out,
Oh
no
yeah.
problem, is because, like again, full disclosure, Bill and I have been working on Holiday off and on for more than 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's a long haul, but that's some great commitment to it.
right, but a lot of it, like 90% of that has been my, health problems, different things that have gone on in my life, back and forth to it. But a tremendous amount of it has been like, no, this isn't good enough, man. Like I got to learn how to draw better. And I was working, like I was a designer. I was a person who on the local level, not on the kind of thing you're talking about, but I was, I was a local Burlington, Vermont area person who was doing both freelance and sometimes behind a desk for the man kind of guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I still wasn't drawing comics even close to as good as I am now. Like, and what I mean by that is I'm not saying like I'm great at drawing comics. I just mean like it was not as good. Like it was pretty
You
damn
feel like
shabby.
it's there's a difference between doing stuff and feeling
Yeah,
amateur, but you're telling what you
yeah,
want, versus
yeah, yeah.
it may not be what as good as I'd like, but it is a professional quality work.
Yeah, and the thing is, even back then when I was saying, like I had offers, like I actually got offers even from pro writers, like, would you
Mm-hmm.
work on my image book? Some folks who now are like pretty far in their careers 10, 12
Mm-hmm.
years later, right? But like I knew that like if that was in a printed book, I might have had a crisis because I'd be like, is this really my best work? But of course, like what I was a dummy about was like, of course you should have done that stuff because everybody else's first work looks that bad. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I had no peers to like sort of hit me over the head like you did, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's okay. I mean, like, the thing is, I probably would have been too stressed out about it. I got anxiety problems and stuff. Who knows? I might have melted down and left the writer in the lurch. Who knows what would have happened. So it's all, you can only like look armchair it so much before you kill yourself. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
All I know is that right now I'm working on something super cool that I love. That's the book I want to buy, blah, blah, blah. And I'm getting to meet all kinds of cool people like you and all these different artists and stuff. It's all great. It's all good. Middle age is not what it used to be. Right. So it's all cool. But I would say that like the delays from it's not, nope, I'm not really, I can't draw that. Like I suck at drawing a horse or whatever it is. And then it holds you back. Like I'm like a good person to just sort of say like, ladies and gentlemen out there, like, don't do what I did. Like, just do the first one and let it, even if you think it sucks on a certain level, try to balance it out. And that's why I'm very impressed by what you're doing, because it's like you got a commitment to quality, but you're also going like, nope, number one's coming out, and number two is going to be a little better, and number three is going to be a little better. And when this book's done, like the other book's going to be a little better, because you don't want to just like, you don't want to die with a bunch of like almost finished stuff. Like you don't want to be in
Oh
that
no,
boat.
no.
That would suck. That sucks. That's torture. We don't want to do that to ourselves either. But it's interesting to sort of figure out how to balance the two and be honest about, like, it's a lot of honesty, right? It's like you got to be honest about whether the work looks good or not, or what's going on there. Is this the best I can do? But at the same time, like, not allow yourself to get just like, run over by not good enough, right?
That's true.
It's
Well,
such a weird combo of it's a twisty balance thing. It's just a very weird balance thing.
the funny thing that helps me in terms of that balance is because I still feel like I am an infant in terms of my comic making. Because really, even
Yeah.
though I did like some small studio stuff, like indie studio stuff when I was in high school, really I'm somebody who's published their first graphic novel, and I'm almost to the end of an 8-issue series. So
Yeah.
I'm like still an infant in terms of my comic book work. But
Oh, sure. Yeah.
one of the things I have really learned now is what I will end up redrawing anyway. Because when I finish
Yeah.
an issue, what I do is
Yeah.
as I finish the actual, when I ink the pages,
Oh my God.
I'm fortunate enough that I've got a wall in my studio that's big enough that I leave it blank, and I just have binder clips tacked around the wall, and I just clip up a page as I finish it, so that by the end of the issue, I can look and see the whole thing.
Yeah,
And
sure.
in that process, each time I put up a page, I'm like, oh wait, this thing doesn't line up with that thing on the other page, or this is just like, I'm looking at it and like, this is not of the same quality as the rest of what's going on there. And a lot of what I'm going back, the stuff that slows me down now is not perfectionism as is trying to create, I'm trying to even out the surface of the story. Like the way you would try to even out the texture of a canvas, I want it to feel smooth. Like it's all, yeah, this all feels like it's of the same creative piece.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of thing like now because there's stuff that I've drawn said, it's not perfect, but I can live with it. And then when I'm sitting there and I'm like putting the pages in Photoshop and I'm adding my gray tones, I'm
It's still
looking at it
driving you
again
nuts,
and I'm
right?
like,
It's like driving
yeah,
you crazy, right?
yeah, exactly. You're looking, I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I can't live with that. I got to fix that one.
Yeah. Right.
So now
Right.
that's the gray area that I'm not mad that I'm doing this. Like I don't find it a struggle for me. I just feel like it's unfortunate that it's slowing down my creative process. But I'm getting better at saying with what I would make myself redraw anyway, and that's kind of how I judge stuff as I go. Um, it's funny when we're talking about process here. I'm thinking about making what is a minuscule difference to a reader, but is a huge difference to me in terms of my creative process. In that I'm thinking about moving away from finishing all of my layouts, then doing all of my inks, and then doing all of my gray tones. And I'm considering, like, I would still need to thumbnail and letter the whole book first because letter. I print out my lettering on. So I've got. I don't know if you can see the boxes here, but I've got like the lettering already
It's
kind of.
a little hard because it looks like your bandwidth may be set to low. You might want to check your gear and because it's a little. I mean, it looks okay. I think on YouTube. Let me just check that again. Sorry to interrupt you with this bullshit.
No,
This
no
is
problem.
like the dumb. This is the dumb crap that yeah, it's a little fluffy looking. So I don't know if you might be able to set your bandwidth a little higher.
You know what's weird is when you're using the Hangouts on the phone, it doesn't give me the little gear, and I'm afraid if I press the back button, it'll disconnect me.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that, though.
Point being is that I would still have to thumbnail and letter my book first, just because that's how my process works. But I'm thinking about doing my layouts for a page, and then inking that page, and then gray toning that page so it's a completed page. Because I am considering, or I'm doing a lot of research for starting a Patreon this year.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And good. I mean, so many people have just said that, it's a great way to let people who want to support you.
And it can work very well in tandem with, although not exclusively with, but it can work well in tandem with crowdfunding.
Oh yeah,
it can be. It definitely works nicely as a double whammy, but it's also a great there's no book to support right now, but you need to kind of keep people on the line, right? So that's how you do it.
Keep people the interim while you're until you're ready to start the next Kickstarter.
It's really important. Plus, there's certain people who their interest is basically the stuff that happens on Patreon. So that's because they have they have a different sort of relationship idea with the creators, and then they'll just buy the book whenever they can find it. But yeah, I mean, so it's really important to approach people from their platform needs rather than the other way around, if you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of changing process, the for me, I really do like to do all of the phases at once, because each phase feels like either a writing or an illustration quality control pass. Every time that like when I'm doing these layouts, my lettering is printed on there, and I think of alternate dialogue lines, and I'll just write them down on the margins.
Yep.
And when I go and do the finished page, I'll change it. And when I come in, I do my gray tones. I'm looking at the lettering. When I'm merging the pieces, I'm looking at the writing again. So each time it's a pass for me to either rewrite or say, you know what, this drawing isn't quite right. You know, let me change it and adjust it. And doing an entire page to completion and then moving to the next page feels like it might disrupt that smoothing out that I'm looking to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also considering the fact that if people are following me on Patreon, I want to give them something that they wouldn't be getting.
Well, of course.
And the rest of it. So I'm thinking maybe I would have one page that gets finished, that gets posted as I finish it, but almost to do it where if I can finish a page or two a week, to start running it almost like a web comic just for my Patreon subscribers.
It's a really smart idea, because and I know there's a number of creators that are doing exactly that sort of thing. For in different ways. I mean, like for some people, it's like videos that like, you know, they're like, oh well, you know, I know that you've been watching me do all kinds of stuff, and you've been following me on YouTube, but now I'm what's going to happen is if you want regular daily connections to me, then, you know, this is where you're going to find it, and it's going to be part of that Patreon package. I think the YouTube model on Patreon, I mean, you know who else just brought up something very much like that, although I don't think it's precisely through Patreon, is Jason Brubaker. He just announced, so I think you're totally on the right wavelength, because this is something that he's sort of making people aware of as he's sort of perfecting this idea, and it's going to go live fairly soon with whatever the newer thing that he's doing is. So I think it's a good model, and I think it makes a lot of sense, especially since you've had how many issues now? You're into like issue.
I'm at issue 7 out of 8.
Yeah.
So I'm the home stretch.
Yeah, and you've had a whole book. You have an audience. You have a thing going on. So I think with all of that, I mean, geez, you know, that sounds like a really good way to do things as a present or future model. I mean, I guess you could hook this into the rest of Morningstar, right? I mean, you could probably do that.
Yeah. I've been. That's one of the things I've been debating, because I definitely think it would be fine in terms of a Patreon. I've been doing research, so I'm wondering whether it makes sense to do a Kickstarter campaign for issue 7, and then, you know, finish that, get it out in print, fulfill that, then do one for 8, and just do it issue by issue, just to sort of. It's not necessarily because I'm not looking for like the $100,000 Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah, no. You want to be able to just print your book and get it into people's hands. Yeah.
But well, for me, it's more of just looking at it as I'm really starting to understand and respect it as a distribution platform for comics.
Yeah.
Like I had this particular year, I only did 3 comic conventions. My convention season's already done. Other than the fact that I might do one more show, a buddy of mine might be getting a booth and ask me if I wanted to join him. But other than that, my convention season's done already. I only did 3 shows this year, because last year, in general, I usually do 4 to 6 shows. By the way, your version of Lucifer it's killing me. That looks so awesome, man.
Oh, you like this? Oh, you really love that? You digging it?
Yes.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. Thank you. I mean, because it's really hard to draw someone else's character, much less like actually put something into it. And I'm trying really hard, so I really appreciate it.
Well, you're doing my character better than I do him.
That's not true.
Because that's not true. You're really capturing him like that because you're really getting the dark side of him.
Well, I draw a lot of dark stuff. If you look through my portfolio, you probably saw like, oh, okay.
Oh yeah, but I mean that's what I'm into though. It's
good.
It's killing it.
So that's good to hear. That's great to hear. Yeah. Well, you know, I'm always available for a cover or, you know, something like that.
I might take you up on that.
That'd be cool. You know, like I would never say like, oh yeah, I could totally draw your 5-page story because you might not see it for 5 years. But you know, but like I would absolutely love to be able to get into doing some like either actual covers or alternative covers for people that are also indie creators. Like I think that's a great way to kind of, you know, sort of like exchange. You know, I think it's a nice way to do it.
Yeah, and plus it's like you're sharing each other's audiences. You know, people are getting exposed to your work that hadn't seen it before, and your people that follow you are like, oh, who's this other creator that's doing a cover for us? So it's really, you know, that's kind of that's the kind of creative synergy that really helps, you know, creators, you know, in the best way.
And actually, by the way, I have to say, like, it was really funny to see your stuff. Not to, or I shouldn't, maybe not your stuff, but rather the book that you're working on, because I'm like, oh yeah, there's got to be at least one or two other weird Western comics out there. I mean, beyond like, you know, Winona Earp, which is, I mean, God, anybody who likes the book, it's great. I'm glad you like it, but it's just it's not really the kind of book that like I would buy or that my creative partner would buy. You know, it's a little too tame for what the potential of the Weird West platform can provide. You know,
well, you want it to
but
you want to have a little of that grit that Westerns have, and
well,
it's from what
plus
I've seen of One on Earth, it seems like it's more like Western high adventure
or something like that. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I think it's also it's just inked wrong. Like the whole thing looks wrong for the material. And even though it's like set now, there's an anachronistic nature of it that throws it off, and it's a there's sort of this verisimilitude of like the guns and the what people are wearing. Like the whole thing just is funky, and I can't quite figure it out. Other than like when I saw it on TV, I didn't like it, but like a friend of mine was like watching it voraciously at my apartment, and she was like really into it, and I thought like, oh yeah, this is perfect though for like some Fox CW thing. Like it's perfect for that. Perfect for that viewership. It's just not a great comic, but it's a great launching point. The comic was a great launching point for providing people with a sort of like a sleeper, you know, kind of hit, like, or what, not a hit, but what do you call, like a cult favorite supernatural type of show. And then I was like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. It's, and then, you know, no problem. Like it was like, it just was in the wrong medium, I think, you know.
Well,
But
you know, I'll tell you, I'm only familiar with it in terms of it being developed into a TV show. I've never actually sat there and read the comic. I'd like to see it because it's like the thing is, I'm one of those people where I can see
excuse me.
I like the idea of a lot of different executions of stuff. So the idea of it being a high adventure Western as opposed to a Western that has more of a Sergio Leone feel to it. That works for me. If for me, it's all a matter of that if the story is good. Like I don't feel like, I mean, we've got Blazing Saddles, we've got Unforgiven. There's in my mind, I'm like I can see a lot of different types of westerns.
Right, and you got like Silverado, which is like, you know,
yeah,
the kind of thing you're talking about, where it's more high adventure. You get that kind of thing. There's good guys, there's bad guys, there's drama, but it's still fairly like nobody's too afraid of what they're going to see or what's going to happen on the screen.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'll tell you one book in particular that I avoided it because I didn't want to be influenced by it was The Sixth Gun.
Oh yeah. Me too. I haven't read it either. And for real, like no lying, have not touched that book, and I will never touch that book. I'll never go near that book.
Look, let me tell you this. Now that I'm close to being done with Morningstar, I went out and I picked up the first volume because I've heard nothing but fantastic things about it.
Yeah. I just mean like until Holiday, the 180-page graphic novel is done. Like there's no way I'm reading hardly anything that anybody does that's weird Western. And Bill's the same way, the writer, because they're just like, I'm not going to do that to myself. I'm not going to put myself through that kind of torture. No way.
Well, that's that. You might be doing the right thing there because my reaction to The Sixth Gun was, one, I loved it. Two, if I had read it before I started drawing my Western, I would have given up.
You would have, you wouldn't have done it.
It's so good. and it's executed so well, both visually and narratively, that I'm just like, I can't make something. That's one of those cases where I can't make something as good as this. Why try? So I stayed away from that.
Yeah. I did look at all the like, you know, like ads, you know, art, like CBR thing, whatever. I've seen all of that stuff, and like pages that had no dialogue on it. So remember, because they were releasing promo pages and stuff. I've seen all that stuff. So I know the whole thing. The only thing I would say is it's beautiful work, but it's overwrought. You know, it's like it's really overwrought, and it's overwrought at the expense of narrative, which I think that's really not cool. But anyway, that's my thing, because those people are making artwork that's like 1,000 times better than I'll ever make in my life. But I you know, I was glad I looked at the pages, because again, I know, you know, like doing something weird Western, I was glad that I at least checked out enough to know, oh, okay, we're not touching this. We're not even close in here. It's totally not the same thing. That's good. But I totally agree that it would have made me a little. It would have taken some of the steam out of my engine for sure, because I'd be like, oh fuck, because you know that the kind of art they're doing, people will just die over, and they should. You know, they should.
Yeah,
it's beautiful work. And I'd be like, oh shit, if we get compared to that, I'm basically driving us into an iceberg, because my work's never going to look that good, you know. But that's the thing, is like, you know, you have to peel it. Like, I remember there was this one time when my writer and I, you know, he was like, oh shit, I found out about X, you know, and no one's going to buy Holiday. I was like, no, man, no, it doesn't mean that. Like I said, do you think that, like, everybody said, oh, well, no one's going to watch, you know, you don't go and see only one Western movie, you know, like there was Leon, like, you know, like even especially in the 70s when the whole thing was kind of falling apart as a art form, right? And then it had to be reconstituted by these other people. It wasn't like, well, if it ain't John Ford, I'm not going to go see it. Now, yeah, there were some people like that, and they were probably like World War II vets or something, that age group. But basically, people went and like said, whoa, this is a totally different kind of Western. I'm going to go see that. And then when that whole phase happened, and Eastwood made his movies, they like went, whoa, that is an entirely different Western. I'm going to go see that. And they saw both kinds, right? You know, that's the point. Like, you can do your book, we can do our book. There's the guy who did the werewolf book years ago. Like, what was that one? I forgot. He's a big
High Moon.
High Moon, yeah. That guy who went on to amazing things. Like, there's room for his, right? There's room for all of them, right? So, you know, but it is true. Like, you check that stuff out, and it might like kill your drive. Like, you'd be like, oh fuck, you know, like that's a heavy it's a heavy thing to put yourself in the position of, you know, having to be as good as, right? Like, it's really.
Well, I think the main thing for me now is that seeing somebody else doing something in the same genre as I'm doing, what it makes me say is, all right, where do I need to zag? Like, if they're zigging, how can I go in a different direction and push my work away from what someone else is doing? And that's, I think, the smart thing to do.
Yeah.
But a lot of times I'll avoid looking at certain work if I think it's too close, because I don't necessarily want to get too wrapped up in that game of just trying to avoid someone else's creative, their creative wheelhouse. Like, if I can find a way to do what I'm going to do, I definitely, if I know that I'm treading on exactly the same territory, then I'm going to change it. But if it's something where it's just sort of like, you know, if it's a vampire Western, then I'm like, all right, well, just because I'm doing a vampire Western, if someone else is doing a vampire Western, doesn't mean I need to not do it. It just means I need to say, well,
because I mean, guess what? There's going to be a fourth and a fifth vampire Western out there too. You know, like, it's not like, it's going to happen, right? So
exactly. I mean, just the idea of that. Most ideas that are worth their salt, someone else is working on it. So
or has done it, and like that's the whole thing. Like, well, my idea, someone stole my idea. Like, no one stole your idea. No one did. No one ever stole anyone's idea ever, except for like maybe the credible case that Fawcett actually hired people and said, make me a Superman. Other than that, right? And other than the competition between Warner Brothers and Disney and the Fleischer Brothers and Abai Works and I'm trying to think of like half a dozen superhero characters that came out after Captain America. I mean, basically, no one steals anything. It's just everybody. Like, there's only so many ideas. There's only so many wavelengths that people are going to be on, and you got to just like, it's like you got to give it up and just like make the thing cool. It's like, is it cool? Like, that's it. Like, that's all you got, right? Like, is it cool? Do people like it?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
It's the execution. That's what really matters.
Yeah, because like, imagine if somebody had said, well, yeah, I mean, actually, imagine if somebody had said in the 60s, in the 40s, National Comics got away with lawsuiting a bunch of people into the ground with Superman, what they called Superman ripoffs, and only Captain Marvel was actually the only one that legitimately was. But like, you know, they stomped people into the ground. Like, they got rid of characters that could have gone on and done good things. But like, imagine if like after, I don't know, so many years, like 60s maybe, imagine if Marvel had said, or not Marvel, Timely, whatever, Atlas, like if Stan Lee and his what was it, his cousin, I think, he was old enough to be his uncle, but the guy who Martin Goodman, who started Marvel.
Yeah.
If Martin Goodman said back to Stan before they were going to close the doors, and he was desperately trying to make, you know, superheroes. He's like, oh no, DC does superheroes. We can't do superheroes. We got to do something else. We got to stick with these monsters and stuff. Like, it would all, the game would be up. Like, there'd be no Iron Man movie right now, and there'd be no like amazing comics that we would have read as kids, right? So it's like, you got to just give it up and say like, yeah, people are going to do westerns, people are going to do zombies, people are going to do, if you're in genre fiction, somebody's going to do it too, and you just gotta make sure your characters are just as cool and there's something to hook people with and all that jazz, right? Like you were saying, like, you just got to know when to zig or zag, right?
Yeah. And I think
you...
the real challenge, and this is something I was talking to some friends last night about, just friends getting together, hanging out.
Yeah.
Was the idea that it really does come down to character. One of my good buddies, who was actually my writing partner when I was in high school, and he said that the thing that's good that he thought was, because we were talking about brands and how to really identify yourself and what makes you and unique. And he said that the reason why most people will follow certain books is or certain creators is really because of the character themselves. And when he says character, he's not talking about it in the sense of, oh, this guy's got this cool skill set and he's got this cool suit, but an actual personality of someone that you'll follow in and week out to see what happens to this person in their life. Like, you care about them as a human being, or, you know, or alien or whatever they are, creature. You want to see what happens to them. So
and it's funny because oh, sorry, go.
No, that was pretty much it. Just that's the real thing. And the character isn't just about the costume and the power set. It's about, who are they?
Well, of course, you know, I mean, that's, you know, no one would ever question that if you were talking about the TV industry, right? I mean, of course, everybody says like, yeah, well, the reason why I watched the entire run of Chicago Hope was because of the really like superhero depiction of surgery techniques. Like, no, like people were like, oh my God, is she gonna lose the baby, or is he gonna end up with her, and are they gonna stay in Chicago, or you know, or you know what, like that dude pulled out a gun, and you know, are they all gonna make it? Like, it's characters, right? In fact, I don't know who said this, but there was somebody who's way smarter than me. Somebody was like, you know, character is plot, right? Like, if you don't have character done, forget it. Just like, then start over, like not start over, but back up and you get that under control, because that's it. Like, if it's not character, without character, there's no plot. Without character, there's no nothing. It's like, and it's not the same as world building, which people like to fetishize and like they go overboard about. It's character, you know. It's like, because there's no Star Wars unless there's Luke Skywalker. It's not a movie about like Dune, where it's like the grand. Well, even Dune's about Paul, right? Like, you know, people like to say, oh, it's a lot of it is about the politics and the. No, it's about a kid who's like 15 or whatever, and he might step up, right, and he's going to become Superman. You know, like, and is he going to be able to handle it? Also drugs. Like, like that's the plot. That's that.
The plot is drugs.
It's
Getting
like
high on a worm.
is a 15-year-old going to be able to handle becoming the genetic Superman of the universe plus lots and lots of fucking drugs, man? Like,
That is the best pitch for Dune I have ever
right?
heard. I've got the Lynch version on DVD. I think I want to go back and watch it tonight.
Lynch is, I love that version of the movie. I don't care what anybody says. They're wrong. They're wrong. And the thing is, they're wrong because they're just too caught up in very conventional ideas of and it's not even like it's weird. It's not even real David Lynch. It's not like fucking Eraserhead.
Very
it's like
different from everything else he's ever done.
Dune's like, and he hated doing it. So it's not his best work, sure. But the thing about Dune is that Dune is like a conventional movie. Like it's not even like, it's a serviceable film. It's not even like some like big weird fest that everybody wants to make it out into being. It's, it's because like they had seen all these other things he had done, like what do you call it, like the Elephant Man and stuff, and they attribute that stuff because it's still on their mind. But in reality, if there was no David Lynch before that movie and you saw it, you'd be like, this is okay. This is a serviceable film. It's not exactly, what a Dune fan is going to like, but it does the job, and it sets some mood that's very interesting. And like no harm, no foul. But there was so many things attached to the maker of the film, and so many things attached to the books themselves, that it was like never going to get given a shot. Like I think if there had been no Dune series of books or whatever, maybe people would have been a little more forgiving about it. But I don't know. But anyway, it's a beautiful I think it's an artist's film, though, is the other thing. It's like if you're an artist, you get Dune because you're blown away by all this like stuff you're looking at, and you're just like, texture and meta narrative texture and all this like crazy things going on at once, and so you're kind of like, give me more,
Have you seen the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's like the movie that, remember Fringe? Remember that show Fringe? Like that's the film that you go to Universe B, and you go to and you go to like the Repertory Theater in like Pittsburgh or LA or Brooklyn, and it would be like the line around the block would be for like, the new director's cut of Jodorowsky's Dune. Like that's what would happen. Like that's the movie that you want to see. You want the universe hopping machine so that you can go
see the world where they made that.
See the world where they made that. Yeah, exactly. Like or half a dozen comics that you wish had happened, or
I just want that massive book, the concept art book. I would kill to get a look at that.
Yeah, they got to figure out some way to make that available to the public. I think, that's a book that like really would be great if Taschen could spearhead something like that, and kind of, and so, because they would be the ones who would be actually capable of handling, the material and handling the printing, and understand sort of the care that you got to give to it. Plus, I mean, they already have a market for multi-$100.
Yeah, large art, ridiculously large art books.
Yeah, like all that Giger stuff that they made over the years, and
like I don't even know if I could. I probably couldn't afford that book if some publisher did put it out. But that said, just knowing that's there in the world, I might be like, all right, well, this will be my Christmas present to myself for the next 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, that book, if that were to come out, I would not be surprised if that were some kind of life-size or bigger than the art hardcover, or maybe be like 2 or 3 slipcased hardcovers all in one. And it would be like $900 or something. It would be like this obscene. I wouldn't doubt it, because you think about how big those things were, and they were bolted together, and who's going to buy it? And by the time you're done, you're probably into an art book that's like one of those Giger $900 or $1,000 kind of dealers, and then the way you make it like actually possible to finance and possible to like produce is like, you make a book that's so obscenely expensive that only the aficionados, they'll throw down, like they'll burn an entire credit card over it, and they're the ones that'll make those 450 copies happen, or whatever it is, or 1,000 copies happen. But I'm just sort of surprised also that Jodorowsky hasn't even maybe tried to spearhead something like that, because I think with talk about perfect. That would be like a huge, big win on Kickstarter to me. Is that book, that fictional book that hasn't happened yet? You know.
Well, I think that probably the only thing that's stopping them is, I mean, I don't know what I think it's probably like a rights issue.
Could be a
Because it was
rights
just one of
issue.
those things where they said, we're never going to make the movie, but we have this book of concept art. We're going to do that. But the fact that the concept art is based on a property that they don't own, I don't know what the legal ramifications are of
Well,
them
yeah,
producing a book that they don't own the rights to.
because it's basically De Laurentiis Corporation would probably be the first rights holder, and then there might be material within that package of pre-production material that would be the authors
Mm-hmm.
probably to sign off on, and then there's the new people who have the rights and are in production for the new Dune film series. So I'm
They're
sure
making a
that.
new, because I know
Oh,
there's the
yeah.
sci-fi. I still have never seen the sci-fi series. Although people told me it's actually pretty good.
Um, it's not really that great. If you read the books and you like the film, I mean, first of all, it's just a cheap production, right? So it suffers from some cheap sci-fi TV kind of. What I mean by that is the cable company. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
suffers from some of their stuff, right? But I think they spent their money the little money they had very wisely. They did a lot of good work. It's all soundstage stuff. So when you try to do desert on a soundstage, it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
phony baloney looking, you know. But I mean, clearly they did almost all the books, which is really impressive as hell. And you know,
Not see. That's the thing, though. This might be Dune blasphemy, but I read the first book and loved it. I read the second book and liked it. I read the third book and barely got through it, and I was like, I'm done.
yeah. Oh, I didn't mean necessarily that you would be like you would love it or you not or because of the story. I just mean it's incredibly impressive that they actually, you
Did
know,
capture that much story in the this TV
in
series.
yeah, because what do they do, two of them, I think, or they
Mm-hmm.
compressed like three books into series or whatever. That's a lot. It's a lot of undertaking in general. I mean, you got to give props to anybody who's going to even attempt that, even if it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
do the job. But it's like you'll watch it and you'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm gonna have to sort of set my sights over here. I think what happens a lot of time, and this is the difference I think between storytellers and consumers. And
Mm-hmm.
consumers, we love consumers because not just because they throw down money, but because they actually love the work. They need to be respected and they need to be enjoyed and cared for in a sense because those are our people, right? You know, but the difference between the consumer of fiction and the producer of fiction is that we know well how better things could be done, and we also know both comparatively and according to its own merits whether something is actually good or not. And sometimes the consumer confuses good with available.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because that's not their
Yes.
their job to be critics, their job, or even to assess. And there's a lot of tone deafness in the consumer market, right? I mean, like there is, because think about how many comics that are crap, or, and I'm not saying crap because you don't like them. I mean crap because they're actually an inferior product. Look at how
Mm-hmm.
many people at conventions sell unbelievably inferior sketches, pinups, whatever, and you're like, oh my god, I thought they liked that artist over there. I mean, how would they want a drawing from that schmuck? You know, like it's because that a lot of people are visually tone deaf, and it's just that the content supersedes for them sometimes the quality.
Well, they don't
So
necessarily have an aesthetic.
yeah,
And to be honest,
yeah,
sometimes someone who isn't a practitioner but has an aesthetic can be kind of irritating because you see them
yeah,
picking things apart. And I'm like,
yeah,
yeah, but do you know how hard it is to actually do what you're saying?
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not saying
no,
that
yeah,
that it couldn't be better, but
yeah,
like for instance, I am actually on the opposite end in terms of being critical of other people's artwork. Like if the art falls down like on in certain areas, like I mean, I look at a Marvel or DC like third tier tie-in book for some crossfit that's going on, and most people might slam the artwork and say that it sucks. I'm like, I've never worked on a monthly book for a mainstream publisher,
yeah, yeah.
but from the creators I have talked to
It's a
do it,
fucking grind, man. It's like it's hell. It's a
yeah,
lot of
any
fucking work.
book, yeah, any book that comes out from a mainstream publisher, everybody bled for that book.
Absolutely.
Period. And they do it month in, month out.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Case in point, right? Like I'm doing 24-hour comic day here in Vermont at a really cool, it was a cool place that hosted and everything. And I did it was the real deal. It was like 24 hours and I was in so much pain and everything, but I was working really hard on stuff. Anyway, it was such a great experience, but the conversations you have, right? You're going to have conversations. And, of course, there were some people there who really knew about doing comic work. And then there was the people that are there that you also want to be there who like never done it before. And it's like, oh, that's awesome. You're going to be doing all kinds of cool crap for the first time. And that's really cool. And we're all in the same room and it's great, But this dude was like harshing on guys like, Don Perlin or, what the hell is it? Herb Trimpe, who just died ago. And, but that sort of serviceable, like who's the dude? Don Heck, who everybody always like, a lot of guys our age or younger, like it's just easy to target, whatever. And I was like, well, I mean, one thing to take into account is that back then guys, they were, first of all, a lot of those people just to pay the bills were doing more work per week than most people are now. And the needs for the art were not as great. So when people did exceptional work, it was because they were actually doing it on their own, for their own purposes. Like it was only really EC where like Bill Gaines was like, no, it has to be better. Fuck off. Like, most people were doing comics a mile a minute, and we were lucky we had the good artists that we had at that era. And but either way, it's a tremendous amount of work. I said, that, right? And he's like, no, because like if you're not going to bother to deliver, then you're a hack and you don't deserve shit. And so Don Perlin, fuck him, and blah blah blah. And I was like, whoa, wait a, like I was like, I said, I said, okay, here's the deal. Like, what did those guys do? They did like I don't know, like Defenders, like crappy fill-in Defenders stuff. And Don Heck was a big Iron Man artist. Like most of the stuff that ended up in the Iron Man animated show from the 60s, that was mostly Don Heck inked or all the way through, whatever, like all this like piecemeal journeyman comic stuff. I said, okay, I'll tell you what, let's, any of us take the balloons, write a script from the balloons. So it's like Iron Man issue 35 or like, some crappy non-Kirby issue of like like Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, or a Ramona Freight and Aquaman story, whatever it is, right, that you don't like, and you draw it in 25 days or actually like 14 days, because some of these dudes were moonlighting for other companies just so they could make egg money. You do that in 14 days, the 20-page story, and draw it better than Don Perlin or Don Heck or any of these cats, and fine. But I said, if you aren't prepared to do that and muscle it up, I said, you're talking shit from your ass to your mouth.
Exactly.
Right? Because like even the worst comic art on the sort of corporate level comics, Marvel, DC, Harvey, I'm talking about an era before a lot of the indie companies came out, right? But all this stuff that like, oh, they suck, they did blah blah blah. Like, shut the fuck up. Because like you can't even draw like half of the shit these guys drew, quote unquote, badly, rushed, under breakneck speeds, not really loving necessarily what they did, not having a generational coming to the industry as fans. They were coming to the industry because they couldn't get other work. These are people that were working for like to feed families and stuff,
and busting their asses.
They weren't coming, oh, I loved comics. Yeah, maybe they read like the funnies in the comics in the newspaper, or maybe they read Golden Age comics a little bit. But basically, these are people who were adults trying to find jobs. Period. And the best jobs were all the like Saturday Evening Post covers and mid-century Illustrator art and all the magazines. That was the highbrow. That was like the cream of the cream. And like if they were doing comics, no offense to anyone who loves comics, I love comics, but you have to understand, if somebody was working in comics from inception point in the 30s on till practically the 60s, you were doing that because you couldn't find better illustration work to do. And you might
was looked down on back in the day.
And you wouldn't tell anybody that's what you were doing. Even Stan Lee didn't tell people what he was doing, because he knew what kind of reaction he would get in an adult like party, like, you know, like where people were drinking and wore suits and stuff and acted like adults and smoked. And he's like saying, "Oh, I work in comics." No, no, no. He's like, "I'm a freelance writer. I am an editor for magazines," because he knew that he and his wife would get like the yellow eye. You know, they get a jaundiced eye and be run out of as uncool, right? So like you got to like be honest, like, and grow the f up when you start throwing slinging hash around about people aren't good, you know, like, or aren't dedicated or whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's like grow the f up. You know, I know. I'm sorry about the soapbox. Like,
no, I understand.
You know?
It's something that I get riled about too when I hear people who, because that's the thing. I don't even feel like I'm.
I mean, we could talk about quality and stuff, and we can really,
Yeah,
and we could do that, and we can do that honestly, right? And with you know, with honesty and integrity, we can say this is not this person's best work, whatever. We can make those because we did crits, we went to school, you know, we know what that's about. But there's this other thing that fandom sometimes does that I'm just like, you know what, like you gotta really rethink your game plan here. You're like, this is not cool, you know, like. Not, it's not like, because the work that goes into like you're saying, even a crappy comic, even staying up with a web comic every week, you know, you do it then. Like, I just want to say, like, well, then you do it. You know?
yeah.
Like,
You can't judge somebody until you've walked a mile in their shoes.
yeah. Like, and you worked in animation and a bunch of other areas. Like, even the worst animated show is like people like kill themselves to get that out every week or every cycle or whatever it is, every season. I mean, people go through a lot to get that shit done. So I can only imagine with toys. Holy crap.
Oh yeah, well,
The money,
let's just have
because the money involved, right? All the people's money at stake and everything else. And,
well, this is the funny thing about the toy industry. The way it works is, you know, Walmart or Target or whatever the large company is, they usually are like, well, we liked something that you did last season. We want something better. Give us some cooler, newer features. Give us some innovation. Give us something that'll really like make our customers just, you know, lose their shit. And we go and we research and we like look into new technologies. And it doesn't matter whether it's a pinball game or a tabletop game, or it's just something like whatever it is, or an action figure. We go through and we try to find new ways to make that toy new and interesting and exciting. And we come back and we end up doing things that we didn't think were possible. We found all this new technology, or we found new ways to engineer to structure it. But because it's new and it's different, it's more expensive. And then they come in, they're like, oh yeah, well, we don't want to pay that. We want to pay the old price for that item. So because our customers aren't going to pay that price.
Right.
And then
with
what
all the
happens
new
is
innovation and everything.
we end up developing a lot of really cool stuff. And then bit by bit, it gets cost reduced, which means different features are taken out. We're like, well, can we get the cost down here? Can we get the cost down there? And that ends up going back and forth between us and our engineer counterparts on the Hong Kong team. And then at the end,
oh, I see.
We just end up saying, the retail say, all right, well, you know what? Just give us what you did the year before, but in new colors. And that's just what happens every year.
Nice.
I mean, that's why you don't get like the cool like Micronauts and the die-cast toys. I mean, now when you get them, they're collector's items that are, you know, where you're paying $20 or $30 for a tiny action figure, because the stuff that we got as you're a little bit older than I am, but the stuff that was when either of us were kids.
Yeah.
You know, plastics were cheaper, metal was cheaper, people were doing stuff. So it's like, well, we have much better technology now. That's why kids are stuck to their phones and their tablets, because that's where the innovation is happening with processors. In terms of physical objects, there's lots of cool stuff that can be done, but the cost of doing it is more than a lot of regular consumers necessarily want to pay these days. So
right, and there's also just like, you know, or I mean, what you're talking about is just, you know, all the stuff that, like, again, like a lot of us creatives don't want to hear about or sort of don't want to invest the time to think about before trying to develop something, which is that there are consumer trends, right? I mean, consumer trends, that's a whole other Megillah, like, because it's like, well, what if this ain't the decade for cool robot guys, like the, you know, or whatever it is. I mean, then, like you said, like, it'll go, like there could be all these like great ideas and lots of meetings and lots of stuff, and then it might be in the end they're like, yeah, just give us what you gave us last year, because at least we know we can sell that at Q4 Christmas time, blah blah, like it'll, and then you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm glad we went through all of that for you. like,
Well, I mean,
like,
once in a blue moon, something gets through.
right.
But or we just figure out a way to keep the cost down and create something that truly is interesting. But it's like once a year I'll design something I'm like, I'm actually proud of that one. So, but a lot of times it's churn. It's going through the motions, and it's not going through the motions in the sense that we don't care. We're genuinely trying to create something that's doing different. But a lot of times we do it knowing we're fighting an uphill battle, and that whatever the coolest thing we come up with is probably not going to end up flying. But it's like going into we have to take that hill no matter what. That's the job. The job is to charge up the hill, even if you're going to get mowed down with machine guns.
Right, because the thing is also, like, just toys specifically, not everybody's working for McFarlane, right? Not everybody's working for where they can actually almost like the dog can drive the cart a bit, right? He can say, well, this is the year we're doing this. And all the toy sellers are like, oh yeah, this is great. They're going to do that. It's not like that for every company, like, right? I mean, like, there's very many different ships, and they take to the water in different ways, and the ports let different ones in at different ports, right? So it's everybody's got to do it, but everybody's got to make their money, right?
Oh, so yeah,
that's very interesting. I mean, you're actually the first person that I've talked to, online or otherwise, that's in that area. And like certainly reading interviews with people and stuff like that, but it's very interesting to hear kind of the bits and pieces of it, and the way it sort of it's not different from a lot of other industries too, where it's just like there's so many like things that are going on that are bottom line oriented and have nothing to do necessarily with the creativity, although they do allow you to, they force you to do some very creative things, right? Because like, weird pressure cooker, right? I mean,
well, that's where it has a lot in common with the film or TV industry, where your limitations force you to come up with solutions that you wouldn't ordinarily have thought of. And, a lot of times those limitations are cost, and you're forced to use materials in new or innovative ways, or just put stuff together in ways you would have thought of. And they're like, oh, that really is different. That's unique. And those are hopefully the things that make it through the gauntlet and end up getting on the shelf. And the whole crazy thing is you go through all this work and you try to get something on the shelf knowing full well that, it's got like probably a shelf life of like 1 or 2 seasons. Like maybe it's not going to be necessarily on the shelf. It might be on the shelf next year, but probably not the year after that. There's very few toys which is a perennial. It's always going to be there. No matter how cool it is, they're going to be like, well, if you're doing something for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, well, we're changing the way the Ninja Turtles look next season, or we're introducing new characters.
Right.
So we need something different anyway.
Yeah, because there's a new show, and each time they do a new show, there's usually a whole style change, right?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, yeah. So how does that? So what happens in, like, what's your end of the toy design stuff? Like, are you the? Oh, that's right. You're packaging, right?
Well, I used to be packaging. I right now I do product design.
Oh, you do product design. Okay.
I do product design.
Okay.
I started out doing packaging. That's how I got into the toy industry. And when I got involved with that cartoon series, that's when they moved me over to product.
Right.
Once I got on that and I was working with the product designers, they were just like, all right, just move them over. And I kind of weaseled my way in because I already had friends that were on one of the product design teams. I kind of hung out with them all the time anyway. So it's just at a certain point, it just became a reasonable fit. When I got laid off from that company eventually, I then moved around and I was doing either packaging or product. Mm-hmm. And then I moved to a small toy company in LA, and I was mostly doing packaging. I would do a little bit of product when they needed to, but our design director was kind of the primary product designer, so they didn't really need me for that.
Right.
But that
Hey,
small toy company was bought by Jack's Pacific, which is where I work now. And now that I'm there, when we first kind of merged and they brought our team over, I was still doing a little bit of packaging, but they really wanted product designers for the division that I was brought onto.
so you
And
lucked out. You got to move back into that
yeah,
a little bit.
I mean,
Yeah,
I am an odd duck in the sense that I do both because they really are. You're usually one or the other in the toy industry,
that
and
makes sense.
the fact that I'm somebody who kind of moves back and forth between these two worlds is pretty unusual. And I enjoy. I live this way.
Yeah.
Packaging design is easier because it's like drawing a flat picture.
Yeah.
You're sitting there, you're doing a composition, and you're telling a story with that package. It doesn't take as much visual stress to do.
Yeah.
Product design is really thinking about how it's going to be used, how it's going to fit into the hands of the children that are using it, what the brand is and how it's going to change how kids play with it. It takes a lot more thought to actually design good physical product. So it's harder, but it's more interesting. And that's
Right.
kind of the challenge between the two. So I can't really say necessarily. If you were to ask me which one I like better, it's hard to say that because product design is more interesting, but it's more taxing. And there are days when I'm like, I just don't feel like putting up with this. And not putting up with this, but like, I just don't feel like working this hard mentally. That said, packaging designers are kind of like, they're like colorists or letterers in the sense that they tend to get projects last. And if other people are running behind, they get screwed with really short deadlines. So
Yep.
that's not cool either. Both sides have their challenges and struggles.
Right. Right. But I mean, even that challenge and struggle is like that eggs you on, right? Because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, now I gotta make this, I gotta make magic happen, and I got this. Um, there's a,
It
there
does.
there can be an edge for that,
Mm-hmm.
right? There can be kind of like, isn't there some? There can be some like firefighter style enjoyment of like getting it, like pushing it through the pipe, right? Like a little bit, or is it just
It
all
does to
stress?
some. It does to some degree, but I have found like I want to save all of that for my comics.
Well, sure, sure,
It's more
sure.
sort of like on a daily basis. I want to come in. I've got a skill set, and I'm all. What do you need? Um, point. I'm all. Oh, I'm trying to remember what it was that they said when Mark Waid was writing the Hulk recently, where he just said, "When I'm a scientist, let me science out. When you've got something you need to be smashed, I'm a bullet. Point me in that direction."
Right,
It's a poor butchering of Mark Waid's dialogue, but that was the gist of it. So I'm more sort of like, when you have some nails, I'll be the design hammer, and I
sure.
come in that way. I try to save the whole like the emotional side of having to get your game up because you've got a challenge in front of you. um I try to stay really dispassionate about the toy design, and to be honest, I think that that's what makes me easy to work with in terms of my coworkers, because I don't get so emotionally invested in an idea that if I come in and they're like, you know what, we have to completely redesign this,
Yeah,
um
you're
and it
not.
might just, yeah, for any
Yeah,
dozens of reasons that have nothing to do with the quality of the design. It might be something where the retailer doesn't like it. It might be where the licensor doesn't like it. It might be something
yeah.
where the engineers found out that this just doesn't work. Whatever it is, my usual reaction is,
Okay.
all right, what do you want instead? Or do
Right.
you want me to just start blue sky from scratch? I just come in, I'm like, all right, the goalposts have changed. What's the new problem? And I just start working on it. Whereas if I have that emotional engagement, I think I'm sure you've seen people fighting over something that they didn't need to be fighting over,
Yeah.
because they just decided, this is the hill I'm going to die on. This is the thing that I created, and if it's not that, then it isn't my creative vision. And and that's not necessarily where it's somebody who's the boss of the situation. It's just somebody who's very deeply involved in the project, and those people can be really hard to work with. My general reaction is, what do you want? My
Yeah.
job is to try and make that and realize that. So
Yeah. In
it's
fact, I was one of those jerks. There was a point. Yeah, and it was really stupid because I had no idea how good I had it. This is one of those
Mhm.
youth stories type deals, and I was working for a friend, and we were doing DVD menu designs, and it was when, again, that was like a good time, like Flash, like, oh, you know how to do this? Great, you're a designer. I don't give a shit if you don't. Like, it's, yeah, sure. In a big city, there'd be like some,
Hmm.
there might have been a pedigree already at that point, but we were here in Vermont, and we were able to do it, which just basically meant we knew how to use Photoshop and make a file that could go into a video format or on a disk. It's not a big deal, right? But like, can you do X? Like, yes, I can work in Photoshop, but what they're saying is, can we trust you? Is really what they're
Hmm.
talking about, right? But anyway, so I was doing these menus and Food Network and all this stuff, and one time I got real huffy about, like, they wanted to throw everything out and change stuff, and it was like, what did I care? I didn't own the business that was working as subcontractors for the bigger business. Like, all I was the pixel grunt, right? Like, all I should have done
Hmm.
was said, okay, like you were saying, and I was just like, this is crazy because it's not going to look good and blah blah blah. And thank God the person who we interacted with was just like, I get it. He was such a great guy. He was such a,
Hmm.
I didn't realize until much later how lucky I was. It was like,
Having
because
somebody kind of
he
look
could
out
have
for you
just,
a little bit. And,
yeah, well, he could have just asked the guy I was working for, was a friend of mine. He would have been like, get rid of this guy. Like, but he was, he was just, he just knew how to work with artists, I guess. But yeah, no, I mean, that was totally one of those creeps who, like, made a big stink about it. And it didn't matter because I had to redo it anyway.
hmm.
Like,
Yeah. So either way, it's getting done.
yeah. And dude, I really care about the integrity of this film that with the DVD menu was for. Was like, was I really like giving a shit about, like, eventually when I figured out I was being a horse's ass, I was like, wait, yeah, I'm being kind of stupid here. I'm sorry.
That's the thing, is when you realize you're like, why am I willing to die on this hill? So
Why
one
did
thing
I?
to have
Yeah,
things you believe in are worth fighting for. It's another thing to be like, what? Wait, what am I? Why am I
yeah,
doing
like,
this?
holy crap, I'm a total horse's ass here.
I mean, the way that I phrase it when I'm talking to my coworkers, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful to either higher ups or to retailers or licensors when they ask for changes, but my joke is that my job is to make horrible ideas look good.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Because sometimes people will ask me to do stuff, and I'll look at it, and I'm just like,
Oh
"What?
shit.
I'm like, you want? That's what you want?"
Yeah,
And
well,
I'm like, all right. I turn around, I turn on my monitor. I'm like, I'll get to it. And I try. And my
yeah.
goal is, in fact, that's the challenge. The worse the idea, the better I try to make it look.
Well, did you guys use the term turd polishing?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so like, yeah, so that's what it is. And for those who are maybe watching this and you're like an aspiring, um, work on a team or work in an office doing design or whatever, you will learn the term turd polisher because you will be one. and
You'll
it's just,
have to.
and that is just how the life is. Like, it's not everything. Everything's not turd polishing, but, and we would joke around about it too. It'd be like, oh yeah, this one's swinging around the bowl a lot today. Like, let me tell you. Because one time we were doing DVDs for lots of stuff, but one of the clients was a client that did anime distribution in the early days when there was still, when a lot of those companies were originally like fan organizations and they got
Mm.
pro and stuff. So anyways, early 2000s, like 99, 2000, 2001. So, there's a series and it was just really awful. And it was one of those deals like where Japanese people would say, wait, you bought the rights to distribute what in the United States? Like, be
Like,
like,
that's
wait,
garbage. Why
what?
would you want to
Like,
distribute that?
exactly, right? How many times have you heard as an anime fan that, like, I don't know, name your thing is like, they're like, what? We don't
They're like,
even.
we don't let dogs watch that over here.
Right, right, but it was cheap and somehow, you know talk about like A plus, like giant fucking golf clap to the marketing people who were able to like sell American kids on tons of garbage, right? Like, because they're like, no, 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 this is great stuff. All the Japanese love that. There, really? Okay, then then I love it. It took a little while before the real stuff started coming over here. So like, like, how it is. It's just like anything. You spend some money on some A list stuff, and then the rest of it's all B, Z list stuff
Mm.
to fill out.
And a
Like,
lot of times the fan base is so hungry for stuff that once they have, as long as they get a little taste that isn't crap. Let me put it this way: you give them steak once a month, you can feed them McDonald's the rest of the month.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And then there's those like funny, interesting times that happen when, a thing has the right riff tracks or sort of the good, it's bad kind of potential, and then it turns into a classic, even though it's everybody knows it's like, you know, uh, like this kind of like crap fest or whatever. But anyway, this is the stuff we were doing DVDs for, and we'd be like, holy crap, like, and you'd have to like watch everything because you need a frame grab, special features, you gotta pull it on, and you would take it from there. And it would just be this stuff like that. And that was the job, And then, once in a while it was like a cooking show that was really cool. And you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm not into cooking shows. This kind of bores me. But you know what? It's pretty interesting and it's been made well and people love this stuff. And that's, it's okay to be, it's okay to be like proud of the work you do.
Hopefully you would always end up being proud. You have to take the shots for being proud where you can. And the funny thing I found is in these corporate environments, the other thing that I always have to remind myself is that it is similar to figure drawing and art in the sense that I don't always know everything. Because I have definitely had times where I have been asked by somebody who is absolutely not creative at all to make a change, and it's an aesthetic change, and I have gone and I've done it, and I'm all, it's better,
right?
And that's a real kick in the nuts to me. That's a gut check to say, hey, I can't just presume that I know everything because I'm quote unquote the creative one on this project. That they're the other people that work in these industries. They have those jobs for a reason, and even again, it's kind of like, it's one thing if some random person at a comic shop is talking shit about Don Heck. It's another thing if someone who's a comic book editor who has worked with a lot of other comic creators says, well, I see what's going on here, and this is actually not good because of this and that.
Yeah.
And
that's
absolutely the environment. Yeah. When you've got these other people who don't necessarily know Photoshop, and they may not be able to use the words composition in the way that we would use it, but they can sense that something's wrong, and they can sense the type of problem, the way I need to fix it, and they'll make the suggestions, and I'll try it, and I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. And then I'm like, why didn't I see it before? And then I'm pissed off that it took somebody who isn't a creative to point it out to me, so I'm pissed off at myself. But that keeps me humble too, to remember that that's one of the reasons why I don't really make any arguments when people ask for changes. I'm just like, if I think something is going to look really bad, my response is, well, let's give it a try and see how it comes out. Because I've done it enough to see that it can surprise me. Other people can surprise me. So, I try not to be a know-it-all. Any of my friends that know me in day-to-day life will tell you that that's bullshit. But I do make the effort to not be a know-it-all.
Nice. Well, don't you think there's a universal solvent amongst any of us who are doing YouTube and stuff, where like we kind of have to be a little bit like that in order to have the gumption to even bother to say, like, to assert some form of like we're asserting that we have knowledge about something, and we're on the internet and we're on YouTube, let's say, and we're making videos and saying, this is how you should do this, or this is what I do. Like, doesn't that, so then it kind of means like you probably have to be a little bit of a know-it-all to like.
Well, I think to some degree, but one of the things that I always try to frame my videos as is that it's less about me handing down knowledge than it is watching me solve problems. So it's sort of like, hey, you don't know how to do this? I don't know how to do this either. Let's figure it out together.
Right. And that's one thing I noticed on one of your vids that I watched recently, was that you were actually talking about how you had to figure out how to fix the problem. You weren't like, and this is how you do it. Like, I like the fact that you were being frank about how you had to figure out how to get to the destination, and it wasn't just this clear thing, spelled out for you. You had to kind of like work it around. That was kind of interesting.
Well, like I mean, that's the thing. There's always, when any person says that this is how you solve this creative problem, it needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because most creative problems have more than one solution. And the solution, I always say, start with the best practices and then work out from there. Because if you try what should be the solution, you also have to say, well, am I implementing that solution correctly? But if you're implementing it correctly and you're doing everything right, it's not working for you, then you need to say, all right, well, why doesn't this work? And what else can I try? And then you can look to solutions from other people, or you have to invent your own solutions. And you can't presume that you are a unique and delicate snowflake and what works for everyone else doesn't work for you. But
yeah, because there's a reason why fundamentals exist, and there's a reason why, yeah.
But I also don't want to shut down the possibility, if I'm talking to some other creator, that for whatever reason, all of the proper channels that should help them figure out how to draw or create the thing they're trying to do, if all those things fail them, then maybe if they find something that's really unorthodox, but it does get them the results that they're looking for, then go for it. So it's more like I'm in favor of exploration, and exploration with a roadmap. But if you got to go off road, or you got to cut through a field or cut over an overpass, then that's what you got to do. So I try not to be, I guess, I don't know if didactic is the word that I'm looking for. It's another D word. It's another D word that's like didactic, but I don't want to be someone who is telling people this is how it is. I like to say that this is one of many possibilities, and this is the possibility that works for me, and this is why. Because I'd like to give people what I think this is one of the biggest thing that I learned from Carl Ganas in taking figure drawing classes from him. Because he teaches you anatomy, and he teaches you volume and lighting and the basics, the fundamentals. But more importantly, what he teaches you is how to create your own set of problem solving tools in art. And right. I mean, I've taken classes that he has on storyboarding, and classes, just lectures he's had on storytelling in whole. And for all of that, his approach isn't, this is how it is. It's all, these are ways of thinking. And the important thing is to learn how to think, and to keep thinking, and to never stop thinking. And that's what the big takeaway that I've taken, and that's what I tried when if there's something that I'm really trying to get across in the videos that I share, it's learn how to think. Don't just learn the answer to the problem, learn how to come to solutions to problems, how to figure out your own solutions. That's the rant. I know I said it like I had one more thing to go, but that was the rant.
No, because it's yeah, there's just a lot of pieces to that. But yes, I mean, basically it's sort of like this thing where, like, there's these two tensions, right? Like, and that's really kind of healthy, actually. But there's these two tensions, and the two tensions are fundamentals and, I'm sorry, but if you really want to learn to draw, you got to learn to draw, right? Kind of stuff, right? Whatever that is that you're learning to draw from. And then there's the tension of finding your own way through the problem. Right. And those are always going to be eternal sort of tensions between the two things. You know, because the thing is, if you don't do crazy stuff, and if you don't try to push things or even do them wrong, you know, just like, no, I know I'm not doing this right, but I'm just going to keep pushing, then you wouldn't have half of the stuff that came out of Image that actually was innovative. Right.
Yeah.
You certainly wouldn't have a character like Venom, which, you know, like, not my thing, but like, you can't deny that that's like just one of the top whatever character designs ever made, you know. And you wouldn't have a lot of the other things that happened there, you know. Just they wouldn't have happened if somebody had said, you know, like, oh yeah, I really need, I'm really bad, shitty with my fundamentals, and I really don't know what I'm doing with this, that, and the other thing. I better wait a couple more years before we start this Image company thing. You know, before I make some character that's really going to rocket off into outer space. Like, nothing would have happened, right? So, but at the same time, you know, like, it really, like, you have to respect your craft, right? So it's like this, there's this tension. And
that whole idea of knowing the rules so that you can break them.
Yeah.
And I always look at it sort of like in Empire Strikes Back, where Luke hasn't finished his training, but he's like, I gotta go. I gotta
Yeah.
go.
I gotta go.
You can have all of the training in the world, but at a certain point, you need to go out and start making stuff or start doing stuff. And when you start doing stuff, when your training meets practicality, it's sort of like, there's an expression that I've heard people in the military use where it's like, what happens when your plan makes first contact with combat? And I forget what the expression is, but it is something where it's sort of like, shit just goes out the window, and that's when you gotta really figure out what you're gonna do and how you're gonna do it.
Right.
And that's the thing. You get a lot of training, or you study the craft or the fundamentals, and it will give you the tools so that you can say, all right, what do I do when I encounter something that I really don't know how to fix? So
yeah, like I have like about 100 of them in this drawing that I'm kind of butchering at the moment. But
dude, I was meant to tell you, like, I was drawing, and then we got into more deep topics as you were going. I was like, dude, that's just so beautiful.
Thanks.
That looks fantastic.
There we go. So am I doing your character any justice right now?
You are doing him all of the justice. He's awesome. I dig that. It's got so much energy to it. It's like he's electric right there.
Good. I mean, the thing is, I got zero ego when it comes to like getting crits. Like I'm like just lay it on with a trowel, like because it's the only way to get better. A lot of people can't, or there's it's just too hard, and it gets really like painful and stuff, and you can't hear it. But I actually like it better because I feel like then people are being really honest, because you can always do better. It's what's really sucks is when people go like, oh yeah, there's some really good things in here. It's like, oh fuck, like that's when you need to be like, look, I'll buy you a drink if you tell me the truth. Like,
get to the real with me.
I will fucking buy you a bottle of whatever you like if you actually tell me the honest truth about what I need to do to fix that up. But yeah, no, that's cool. I'm glad that it's working. This is actually how I work. I mean, I don't do pages like this. I don't do just a big sprawling piece of paper or something. I do them on a rectangle, and I do them pretty much straight up. But but like most of I actually don't even pencil really like this. I actually draw almost 100% with my inks, and a lot of shit happens or falls apart, and I'm doing new panels and everything like that. But I'm just like I'm kind of stuck in my ways. I do thumbnail though, a lot, and what I do is I thumbnail, and then I take the thumbnails and I blow them up in Photoshop, and I stick them in the template, and then I print them as blue lines on the boards. And then that's what I use as pencils, basically, because I don't want to lose anything. I don't want to lose one fragment of angularity, or I can't look at thumbnails and make them cool on the boards. Like they always look dead. So the only thing I'm trying to do now is like, okay, well, if I could add in a step where I print the thumbnails out, but I print them on shitty 11x17 and take like a roller ball or Bic pen or something and try to execute a final drawing on top of that. And then that goes in and that gets printed on the board, and that's the pencils, right? And I did that for the project that I did with the migrant workers, and it actually was more successful because of that. But all the stuff that you saw in that holiday #1, that's all pretty much drawing straight out the gate with ink on the boards, which is kind of how I learned how to draw after a while, because my pencils were just garbage. And there's this I ran into an older comic book artist, and what he said was like, well, your stuff's really rough. He said, what it's really scribbly. It's like scribble. And he was like, what you should do? He said, like, take a marker or a pen, and he said, just try to draw a finished drawing in pen without any pencil underneath. And I was like, okay. And of course they looked like total garbage. Like they looked like just, mashing of markers on markers. But what happened was after about a year, I started doing this thing where I could draw like a cartoon face without any pencil, right?
You learned how to use fewer lines and make better decisions.
Absolutely. And there was because of the stress, right? Like, and it forced me to draw in my head. Now, I mean, this is messy stuff. Like, this is not like the other stuff I normally do, but the one thing I enjoy doing more, and maybe it's become a process, and I'm not willing to give it up, is the spontaneity of what happens. Like for instance, in his face, and
Mm-hmm.
like the stuff with the dreads that I did. If I planned that out, I would never get that. You know what I mean? Like if I planned this out, I wouldn't get this area here, or like this hand here where there's just some like crazy lines going on here. And
You
I
need to
would
give it
rather,
room for the gesture, the
yeah.
spontaneity.
So like for me, it's like I'd rather have that happen and then have these things get kind of funky, and then have to really fix them with white, re-ink, do stuff in Photoshop, whatever. I'd rather do that than lose this, because this is hard to like just do with lots of steps and planning. It tends to happen more by spontaneous, and it tends to happen because ink's messy. Like liquid ink is usually kind of a messy business.
Oh yeah.
So now you, however, and this is you, because I watched one of the videos recently. Maybe it was even the one we were just talking about. I remember you were inking in stuff that's in the latest issue, and you were filling in blacks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can't remember what the context for the subject was. Oh, maybe there was something that you drew in that other people might use white for. I don't remember, but anyway, you were inking in these silhouettes. Oh, I remember what it was. You knocked out the skies are all knocked out as black inks on
Oh
your
yeah.
work,
Mm-hmm.
and you then were like, wait, I can do more. There's more verisimilitude and more authenticity to these skies, even though you're doing highly graphic looking work, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of flat blacks and stuff. But
Yeah, yeah, I
you're
remember. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I
and you're
remember
like,
that.
I want to knock these skies in as grays, and so you were going in with the white on top.
Yeah, exactly. And I wanted to kind of just make it sort of a. I realized that the sky wasn't going to look. It just wasn't going to
Yeah,
look right.
wasn't gonna look right.
Being, yeah.
But you're very good at, like, taking the kernel of the idea in your small thumbnails, pulling it up to what you're doing right now. Because I'm looking at obviously what you're doing. I'm gonna make it so that I'm talking, but we're seeing your stuff. Um, now this is a page, or this is a layout, and that then this is like a comp that then becomes a page later, right? What you're doing right now.
Yes, that's exactly what it
Okay,
is.
right. It's like
What
it's the
I.
transition between the final art and the
Mhm.
thumbnail,
Well,
right?
yeah, because what I do is much like you, I've got kind of a looser style, and there is no point in me doing tight pencils. It's a waste of time. And when
Mm.
I come back and I ink them, all I'm gonna do is just loosen whatever the inks are the tightest my work's ever going to get. Everything before
Yeah,
that is even looser than that.
right.
And my inks are not particularly tight. I'd say that they're becoming tighter, but that's only because I'm trying to work to gain more control, not because I want to be a particularly tight artist. If I make loose expressive marks, I want them to be a choice as opposed to because I don't have the control. But what I do is I draw, the pretty loose versions in red pencil. And the only reason why I do them in red pencil, it's something I picked up from animation, but I have to do it in a different color than I do the corrections. So the graphite is darker, so I can draw over the red.
You're
It would get
basically
confused.
you're basically inking the roughs. You're inking the roughs with pencil. Is really what you're doing in a sense.
I Exactly, but even these, I feel like this is not as detailed of a
No,
pencil as say you would find in a Marvel or DC book.
no,
It's still
definitely not.
pretty, yeah, it's
Yeah,
still pretty
yeah,
rough. That's why I
yeah.
consider them layouts. So I
You know what
go
they are?
from.
You know what they
Hmm,
are? They're Gene Colan roughs, right?
I would take that as a compliment
Yeah,
any
yeah.
day.
But
Yes,
I'm
sir.
saying, like, I know that. Yeah,
Mhm,
it's not a slander. I just mean,
mhm.
like, but like I'm trying to think, like, who's an artist where their roughs might look in that same valley, and I'm like, well, yeah, probably Gene Colan's roughs were like that for Tom Parman Inc. when he had to like bust out Daredevil every month or something back in the day or something like
Mhm.
that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't used to do as much. Like I didn't really used to do a lot of actual like defining black and white. I wasn't really spotting them, but it developed out of two things. One was just the fact that instead of just putting the X's in there and the places are going to be black, I find that I can kind of get a better sense and kind of sculpt the thing a little bit more if I shade it in. So really, I only just use X's if I'm doing a really, really large area of black. And then 2, I print sketchbooks of each issue where I print my rough layouts, and but I print them with my dialogue. And the reason for that is, 1, a lot of people like to see behind the scenes work anyway, so they like to see that rough version. Yeah, and then 2 is that because it takes me so long to finish each issue, it gives people a chance, like if you really want to see what happens next, and I'm taking 4 or 5 months to finish an issue, you maybe like in 2 or 3 months, you're like, oh, well, he's got a new sketchbook out, I can buy that. Or if they see me at a convention, they're like, well, I'll pick up the sketchbook, I just want to see what's happening next. That way they can read the story over my rough pencils, and then a few months later when the finished version comes out, I've got that finished ink book. And also the sketchbooks, I only keep them in print until I get the finished book ink. After that, I don't print any more of them, so they kind of become collector's items.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and that's a good idea. Ash cans.
Right. Right. Oh, and yeah, you know what? I think before I knew who you were, like through Peter or something like that, I think I just happened on one of your videos because I'm slamming and slamming and slamming through looking for good content on YouTube for all this stuff. And I am sure that I found was there a whole video you did about ash cans, or that basically ended up being about that subject?
Yeah, I've done videos where I talked about kind of the self-publishing process from the.
That's where I found it.
Yeah, there was one on
sounds
how
so
to get
familiar.
started. And then there was one where I said, you know what, for people that were sort of like, I don't know, like, well, I want to show people this was the first thing I published. So I showed, here I showed my graphic novel, and then I said, that's what it was. Before I did that, I had this little ash can. I just took it to conventions, and
totally remember that one. Yeah, from about, I don't know if it's more than 6 months ago, I think you did.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's all starting to blur together in these days. And what's funny is I'm probably going to switch to doing live streams for all of my YouTube videos, and then save the ones that are a little bit more of the video essay with the time-lapse videos. And I'm probably going to save those for the Patreon because...
Yeah, I would say you want to definitely up your game on your camera action too, and that'll help that out a lot. Because video is it's really critical. It's just really critical stuff.
Oh yeah.
Like I already know like what I want to buy in a year, and I'll have to figure out how to make the money to do that, because it's just like, if you're going to do this kind of thing, it requires an investment. Otherwise, the product you're offering people, they can't like appreciate the what you're trying to do for them, and that's the whole other thing. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear, because like when you were saying like, and then you made an ash can, like a lot of people might approach the whole process of like, well, I'm going to do all this stuff, and then it builds into the final book. But because, and this is my presumption, because you are so ingrained in the product world, because it's like your bread and butter, literally, right? Do you think that it has these like interesting positive effects on stuff like, well, wait, that's not garbage for the shredder. That's another, in a sense, that's another product. I don't mean it necessarily in a totally what do you call it, mercenary way, but it is true. Like, why not take that stuff and do something with it that people can buy or appreciate or whatever, right?
Well, you know what? I would say that working in the toy industry has very much helped me think of myself as a creative business.
Right.
And it's forced me to look at my creativity through that kind of lens. And the thing I've also, part of what made me embrace looking at it that way is that, because I do think I had a resistance to the more mercenary aspects of art as commerce versus art as expression when I was when I was much younger, more like in my 20s, which is usually the age when you feel that way.
Yeah, sure.
But I think I came to the realization that the artists and watching the rise of Image Comics was part of that. And it was the sense that the artist who I saw controlling their own destiny, the artists who had creative freedom were the ones that had financial freedom. That's the quickest way to sum it up.
Oh yeah.
And it's the idea of learning how to make your business profitable enough that you can decide what you want to do as opposed to doing whatever you can because you have to. You're being limited only by the opportunities that are placed in front of you instead of being able to create your own opportunities.
Right.
And that's something where like I look at work that I'm making and saying, oh, I can create an opportunity here because I'm going through this creative process anyway.
Want to
Like,
do something with this?
yeah, like for the just the fact of doing the videos, a lot of people are like, wow, you do so much and you're prolific and productive. And I'm like, well, the whole thing with the YouTube videos is I'm going to be drawing anyway. Why not just record it?
Right. So that's
Yeah.
that same mentality over and over again happening. And you're, instead of sort of being blind to it, right, where a lot of people might be, you're actually at least cognizant of it. And you're saying, oh, wait, there's an opportunity here. It's sort of like there's so many industries in physical production industries. And I'm sure you know about this because
Oh, yeah.
you're with the actual physical making of things, you know, where an entire industry is built out of the detritus of another, right? It's like these shavings from this thing that people do to make this other thing. And then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, we can make this thing number 4 out of that. And suddenly an entire, you know, that becomes its own vector of production and product and so forth and so on. And these, and sometimes in a really cool way, like reclamation and so on, like really neat things. And I'm sure that the toy industry's got to have a lot of that built into it too, right? Plastics or metals or whatever. I'm sure that there's aspects of that going on.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is more like saying where they have a structure or a concept that's already been invented and saying, how can we reuse this in a new item, in a new way? So,
right.
that happens all the time.
I mean, Masters of the Universe as an example, but you could use a million examples like the Mego line or any line. I mean, we're talking about like the half of the design of the toys was predicated on reuse, right? Of
Having
parts
reusable parts, yeah.
yeah, you know, like these, and not just the standardized like body parts. I'm not even talking about that, but rather like, you know, probably a head of a creature could be easily reconstituted with a little bit of alteration into a whole other creature, right? So like,
Well, a
or
lot of them they have the same heads, and it's just
yeah,
painting. This girl has blonde hair instead of a
yeah,
brunette, or
right.
or like you put a mustache on him, and all of a sudden you got Shipwreck from GI Joe. It's just
Right.
little
Yeah,
things
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. And that stuff fascinates me, by the way, about toys. That's one of the things that's really, to me, actually like really interesting. It's not like some people are like, oh, that's really cheap, but that's all they did. They stuck this on that. And I'm like, you know what? That's kind of cool because like, that's like, I don't know. There's something about that that just kind of, you know what it is? It's like when you said that you were making toys out of toys when you were a kid. I didn't want to interrupt because like here's my first memory, and of course I didn't get into toy design or any of that jazz, but like one of the best memory I have about the action figures that I grew up on, which was all the stuff from the 70s, right, was that I could take all those Mego figures and I could uh, interchange the costumes on them. And my friends and I basically, what we did was we took everything from every Mego, scrapped it, shaved off the hair or the color, repainted stuff, and made all of our own superheroes out of like, and we sometimes we resewed like costume parts together and stuff like that, right? Now, not that big of a deal, but it was critical to my creating stories. Critical, like absolutely critical. Would probably would not have worked out some of those early, you know, sort of like muscle attempts at doing those things had I not had those Migos that I could just sort of say, oh yeah, I'm going to put Robin into the Captain America suit, and I'm taking the star off the front and replacing it with this other thing I made with a piece of, you know, vinyl that I found somewhere, you know, and there's a whole other superhero, right? Like, you know, all that stuff. I mean, it was crazy. And it was absolutely, before I started drawing that kind of thing, I was making it out of those toys. And so the whole kit bashing, you know, like taking the model kits and
Oh yeah.
making spaceships out of tanks and submarines and stuff and kind of flipping all these things together into new things. Like, you know, that's what. And so like when I see like, you know, the not like, what was it? There's the Skeletor, there's Skeletor, and then there's like the Skeletor, the person he was before he was Skeletor, basically this
Keldor.
dude. Yeah, the dude with the mustache, but he's like
Yeah.
got the blue skin. And I'm like, oh my god, that's the one I want. I want like I like Skeletor, but I really want that one because that's like everything Skeletor except for that one thing, which is this like handlebar mustache guy, right? Like, and I'm sure that
Like
they were
Tom
just
Selleck Skeletor.
exactly, and I'm sure they were sitting there going like, "Well, you need to make another Skeletor. I'm really bored with this shit. Hey, we don't want to spend any money this year on Q3. You know, can you just take Skeletor and turn him into something? Yeah, I'll just put a mustache on him. I'll give him a human face. That's like minimal production costs." And suddenly this minimal production cost total cheapo like cheap thing or cheat, I should say, turns into an entire story within the Masters of the universe, right? Because they made
Yeah.
a story around it.
Well, there's
That's
another. I can't
killer.
remember what his name is, but there's a
Killer.
blue-skinned He-Man, and I forget
Right.
what he is. But you know, he's a guy who was a villain, like sort of like the
Wasn't it like
the
an evil clone or something?
yeah. I don't remember what the story was in the cartoon, but I just remember the fact that like you saw that and you knew that all it was just a blue-skinned He-Man. Like what they
Yeah.
even I don't know if they even changed the symbol that was on his
I don't think so.
bandolier. I think they
I think they
made
just
that different color too.
yeah, I think they used all the same molds. It's just they changed colors to sort of do the job.
But they
And
worked
then
into the story and kids ate it up.
right, and like I was way an adult by the time those things come out. By the way, like I'm, you know, I'm not a kid at that point, but I just appreciated it because it was like there's something intrinsically fun about, you know, taking something apart and doing something else with it. It's like it's nowhere close because of course the cultures don't match up. I mean, I guess they do match up a little bit. They intersect, but it's like presumptuous. I think is more like what I'm going to say. Like culturally presumptuous to make the comparison. But it's a little like hip hop or like, you know, what do you call it? Like you know, like taking
just
clips.
the remix concept.
It's like it's a remix. It is a remix, and it's there's something really funky and cool about remixes that just like always turn me on, and I'm like, oh yeah, do it again. Like you know that guy who's more in the art toy movement, the bootleg movement. What's his name? Suckaholic or something like that. The guy from New York City, and his whole thing was like taking, you know, like Star Wars figures and putting them together in weird ways and doing these like short resin cast runs of that stuff. And in the early 2000s and stuff, there was a huge art toy movement that kind of
was
came
he the
out
one
of
who
that.
did the samurai Star Wars figures?
Maybe no, nothing quite that like well thought out. It's more like he would just take piles and piles of pieces, junk them back together, and then cast them in like pink plastic and sell them like in New York City on bodegas, street corner stuff. And eventually he became like a big artist, and it sort of spawned this huge toy thing. It's really a hipster deal, and he was called Suckadelic. He called himself a Suckadelic, and like his shtick for a long time was he dressed up in all pink or silver foil costumes and like b-boy kind of outfits, but he'd have like a Boba Fett helmet on that would match the colors, you know. Like he was doing this anonymous thing for a long time, and then eventually he realized, oh yeah, wait, anonymous means you don't make any money because people just like the mask. They don't really give a shit about who you are, and they don't give you any
gotta
money.
get in there.
So then he started to figure it out. But anyway, if you look up Suckadelic, there's this whole thing, and that's like the ultimate like street level, underground kind of garage level of that, where it's literally like I'm going to take Boba Fett's head, and I'm going to take a Barbie doll body, and I'm going to make like like weird naked beach girl Barbie Fett, you know, or you might even call it Barbie Fett, and it's like a bunch of hipsters give you like $300 for that figure because it's like a one shot. But whatever way it goes, like the remix is like kind of where it's at, and that's also kind of doing what we're doing, right? Because we're doing like Weird Western, for instance. I mean, Weird Western is nothing but a remix, right? I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah, it's Western with horror / supernatural elements.
Yeah, or other things like it can even be like in our book. There's a lot of like weird time travel and acid trips and strange stuff going on. You know, like it's just sort of like saying the Western is a platform to then add these other things, like El Topo, right? Speaking of Jodorowsky, I mean that's a mashup. That's a absolute like remix of. He was remixing a remix. He was like remixing spaghetti westerns.
Oh yeah, I saw the
Like,
clips in the Dune documentary, but I've still never seen El Topo. It's on
you
I've
never
got
seen
a
El Topo?
long list of shit I need to see.
So let me
That's
tell
the
you
problem
something.
with
Like,
yeah.
yeah, I'll send you an email list, and like, there's some key weird West stuff that sort of started all this jazz, and some of it's movies, you know, and like there's this one movie called Zechariah that was basically like Country Joe and the Fish producing acid western that was kind of almost a little like Godspell as a western. Like there's kind of like
That's weird.
it's really really weird, man. It's really weird, and everything's all western tropes because it's like gunslinger stuff and everything, right? But it could be maybe post-apocalyptic. You can't really quite figure it out. And also there's Country Joe and the Fish music, and you know, actors that you totally recognize as like B actors and stuff, really young, but from that 70s period. And because, you know, everybody was trying to figure out who they were, and everybody was trying to like do it through drugs and, you know, oddball, like sort of everything was an acid trip, right? So it's like, yeah. But anyway, with Weird Western, it's like Weird Western is a remix. And that's why I think it's not effective for everybody. Like some people just can't dig it because
some people aren't into the remix.
Yeah, like I think it's more. It's like I want my, you know, it's like what is it like? I want my meat to not touch my potatoes and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, like I think it's kind of like that. I don't know, but also like it's hard to sell. Like I mean, they say it's hard to sell westerns. I think it's going to be. I think after like our books could conceivably be those books where somebody's going to say in 25 years or 30 years, like, well, you know, westerns came back and the weird westerns sort of achieved this zenith in comics, but it took these sort of pioneers to like kind of make the headway on it first, and then it's like, you know, like that kind of thing.
Well, you know what? I would like to believe something like that, but the stronger truth is that westerns have never gone away. I mean, if you look at cinema after like the spaghetti westerns, at least let me this way, more than every 10 years, probably closer to every 5 years, there's a notable cinematic western. And I would say the same thing has always been true in comics or in any other novels. The only media where westerns have never gone away. I mean, like Larry McMurtry's continue to publish novels.
And there's a lot of supernatural western stuff that kind of rode the coattails of steampunk. I think it kind of came back through that.
Yeah, and like for instance, I've been really big on Audible because that way I can listen while I'm drawing. I'd never read any of Joe Lansdale's novels, and I recently got one of his. I can't remember which one, but I just saw that it was on sale. I'm like, I've been meaning to read Lansdale. Hell yeah! So I just bought it. But
he's really good.
Yeah, but the fact that westerns and weird westerns, I think that the only people who say, well, you can't, they don't sell, are people who just aren't into it and they don't want to do it. They're like, it's not that they don't sell. They're like, I can't sell them.
The other thing, though, to be fair, is that if you just look at the sales numbers on even like the stuff published by DC, the what's the Tim Truman, Jonah Hex book, those are not as good sellers as other books in their catalog, right? But there's a sufficient amount of sales to make them somewhat profitable and worth doing, right? So it's like there's obviously a niche audience, and they like the material and they want more of it, you know. And I think that's why, you know, if we do our homework, all of us who are creating these books, you know, we have an ability to maybe be in early on a niche that's gonna, at some point, it's gonna have some energy to it. And I'll tell you why I think it's the only reason why I'm not completely cynical about it, and it's because of this, which is why I think we all need to get our graphic novels of these things out like as fast as possible, or at least timed right, because apparently the new Sin City book is going to be a western about the same city but back in the
West,
in the Wild West days.
God.
So in other words, like the mythology of Sin City as a city is that it existed in a kind of Wild West period in that period. Like it was of that also. Like it wasn't maybe purely like a urban Chicago. It was maybe like a more of a, it had a Wild West period. So imagine what that's going to look like, right?
That I did not know that. That sounds so cool.
I just mashed through a crap load of Frank Miller interviews because he's now feeling well enough so that he can go to shows and he's talking a lot more
Mm-hmm.
and he can function because obviously he was really
Not
death's
doing
door
well
sick.
for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the byproduct of that is when people say, "Oh, well, what's coming?" And I hear, of course, some of the older ones he's talking about the 300 sequel or prequel, so that's kind of old news. But
Mm-hmm.
some of the more recent ones, he's talked about how like when they say directly, "What about Sin City?" Oh, well, the plan is this, and he said it a couple of times, so I think it's fairly certain that it's true. So I'm thinking like, so then that's where my marketing gears start to turn. And I think, okay, well, if he's going to do that, then, so, cause you know what I mean? Like all it takes is like the right person who's got the right,
It's the zeitgeist, being at the right place
right.
at the right time.
Like and he's the kind of person that can drive that train rather than have to react to that train. So what I think about is like, if he drives that train, then a lot of us could, then ride that train. And that's a totally, by the way, for anybody who's listening and saying, well, that's not original. It's like, no, actually that's the most original marketing strategy. That's the only marketing strategy there is if you want to actually live.
Find what works and do it.
Yeah. You either have to be in the wake of the whale or you have to be the whale, but either one is a successful survival method. Like that's how it works, just get over that originality crap too. That's another version of the, you have to be, about the originality sort of bullshit thing. It's like that's another version of it is like, well, you're just doing what somebody else is doing. Yeah, like that's pretty much how it all works. Like, like
someone's always gonna say you're just doing something else that someone did.
Yeah.
So
Get over it. Yeah, I mean, and plus, like, oh, you're speaking of Masters of the Universe. You're a Masters of the Universe fan. Well, guess what? If there hadn't been Star Wars, then basically Hasbro or Mattel, whichever one it was, wouldn't have had such egg on its face that it had to like try to drive a train and get a toy line out that made some money. And if you're such a big fan of like Masters, then guess what? Like the thing that you love the most is a based on a copycat deal that just went really well. Like, it happened to go super well, like.
Greg, I was hoping to stay until you were completely done because I'm really enjoying watching you work on this piece.
Oh,
but
no,
I've kind of got some family stuff that I got.
No, that's totally cool, man.
Of. But this.
I mean, it's got to
really
end at some point. It's got
it's the stream that never ends.
Exactly. We're just gonna be like leaving it on, going to bed, coming back. Yeah. Let me tell you something, man. I have to say, it is such a privilege to talk to you. So refreshing to talk to somebody who knows what's up and what's not, and like and knows like the real deal about how things are done. And it's really refreshing to have conversations with people who have been in it and can talk about it and and all that stuff. So, and plus you're a good guy and you got a good sense of humor, and it's a great conversation to have with you. So I'd love to do this again if you're up for it. Be super fun.
Yes, I would totally be up for it. You are too kind. I really appreciate it. And, it was an honor to hang out and talk with you. I mean, this is really good. I mean, that's kind of the nice thing when you can just hang out with other creators and talk and shop. And it's, it was a fun conversation. I'm really glad and honored that you asked me on. I'm honored that you hold my artwork in high regard.
It's great.
I appreciate it. This was a great time. So yeah, we'll do this again sometime.
Before we cut it, though, I just want to make sure that because we talked so much about everything and we didn't actually talk about the book, and we don't have to get into detail about it, especially if we can have another conversation. But just so that we go over this again, the current book that you're working on is Morningstar, which is, again, if people haven't figured out already, is a really cool book about Lucifer and his demise and his downfall from heaven. Sort of recontextualizes a Western book. Oh yeah, let's click on that so that you got. Whoops, there we go. Yeah. And that book can be found at jeremy.net. And there, if you go down to the show notes down there, there's the preview section where you can actually look at online PDFs and sort of check it out. And you have done the book previous that was
Eye of the Gods, which is a psychological
Eye,
thriller.
right, Eye of the Gods. And all of his links are below, but basically it's Gerimi Burleigh, but GERIMI.net, and YouTube and Instagram and all that stuff with Jeremy in the title. So the thing I would say is that please don't wait till the next time we have this conversation again with Jeremy. Go check out the book, buy the books, share the book, and like the book, and do all the parts of that, but buy the books, because we don't have books for you unless you buy the books, right? Like, if you want us to make the stuff,
we got to make the books. People got to buy the books for us to make the books.
That's right. Now, are you going to be doing any convention appearances? You're done for conventions, right?
I'm pretty much done this year. There is a small chance I might appear at LA Comic-Con in, I think it's October. But that's sort of like another friend of mine asked me if I was interested in splitting a booth, and we'll have to see if we're definitely going to do that, and if we can, get the spot. But other than that, I probably, from now on, I'm pretty much doing WonderCon in LA, Amazing Las Vegas Comic-Con, and Phoenix Comic-Con. And that's pretty much, like, I'm just keeping it down to a few shows from now on.
By the way, do you know Javier Hernandez?
Yeah, I know Javi. I don't see him as often as I'd like, but he's a great guy. I run into him at different shows.
Okay, because I thought, that's another, like, to me, obvious connection thing. If you didn't know him, you reach out to him, because he's such a terrific, giving, interesting, talented guy. So plus characters that are, again, all of us are sort of on similar wavelengths. So, but I'm glad you've made that connection with him before. So just wanted to get that out of the way, so you can, we can.
No, that's the other reason to do that. You're like, let's end with the plug. You're
exactly.
Professional. You know this. You're like,
you know what I'm saying? Like, we got to do that. Yeah. And you anybody can see my stuff. I got my links down in the show notes. But the important thing is to check out Jeremy's work. It's just really solid stuff. And and hopefully maybe we can figure out some way to do some linkage. I would love to see a Morningstar holiday. Like, it would be really cool to do some, like, little 12-page or 8, some little book.
That is a great idea. We should yes.
I know Bill would be like immediately like, yes, kind of thing. I think it would be a very interesting project to try to do. So, because there'd be a lot of compatibility. But at any rate, and also, it's really funny because one of the next project we're going to be doing after the holidays over is a book called Morning Stars.
Oh, cool.
But it's like totally different thing. It's like completely different thing. It's about 70.
I liked about the name is like the Lucifer. If there's no character more important than Lucifer Morningstar, like people
it's a great name.
Multiple versions of Sherlock Holmes.
Absolutely,
like, Lucifer is
perfect.
And one of the oldest characters.
And that's why we need to have a second conversation. So maybe we could do some hookup in the coming week or something, because I'd really like to get into. Because it really takes a couple hours to talk about a person's work and their ethic. It takes another whole period of time to talk about the book. That's its own thing. And so hopefully we can relatively soon, there'll be time for you to do that.
We could definitely have a long conversation about that.
Maybe that's what I mean.
Maybe we'll do a channel swap, and I'll get on Google Hangouts, and I'll broadcast you from my channel. We can kind of go back and forth.
Oh, that would be great. So let's make a plan for that after this is done. I mean, when you're free in a day or whatever it is that you can do that. Okay, so so jeremy.com and go to .net and go to the links and buy the stuff, because it's actually worth putting dollars down on. And remember, when you buy the singles, I know it's hard because a lot of people like to wait for trades, and I totally appreciate that, because that's why we're pretty much doing a trade right out the gate. But it helps to buy the singles, because even if it's not a money maker for the creator, it actually helps them to gauge like whether it's working out, like whether it's working, whether you're into it. So if you can, do it, because he's even got a digital easy to buy, easy to read. So, all right. So again, this has been a Flame A live draw with Gerimi Burleigh. Thank you so much for giving me your time and giving everybody who's watching this your time and sharing your talents, sharing your insights.
Thank you again for having me, Greg. It was fantastic.
Okay. All right. I'm going to stop the broadcast, but I want to talk to you just for a sec after I do. And